Hello, 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 and welcome to What the Math. This is your Master Jedi, Anton, and today we're going to be trying to recreate Star Wars Galaxy in Universe Sandbox 2. This is an idea that someone suggested in a comment a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, and I should have done this earlier, but you know what? I didn't really know how to do this, but finally figured this out. So we actually have this galaxy that is actually, well, it's not an original galaxy, it's from the simulation called Supernova in Galaxy. So if you want to try to recreate this, you can just use this as well. And then I just manually added every single star from the system using a map that I posted in the description below. And here we have our main stars from all of the movies, including the Clone Wars cartoon and some of the other mini-series like the comic books. But I didn't obviously include everything because there's actually quite a lot of stars in literature and various fan fiction, and of course in the new episode 7. So episode 7 stars were not included because I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it yet, and we're going to add them sometime next year when most of you have seen it by then. So anyway, so we have all of our stars right here. So there's Endor, Bespin, Hoth, Mustafar, Dagobah, Sullust. This is actually the one from the very recently released Star Wars Battlefront video game. It was released in 2015, so there's a system called Solus that we don't really know much about, except for, of course, that you get to play on it. There is Utapau, Naboo, this is Tatooine, and right next to Tatooine, there's another system called Ea, and it actually has a planet called Geonosis that appears in one of the movies. And then we have Kamino, Kashyyyk, Yavin, Alderaan, Coruscant, and of course the center of the galaxy known as the Galactic Center. This is a black hole that's very similar to the black hole that we have in the center of our galaxy, but here it's just called Galactic Center. So if you want to check out the map, I posted it in the description below. There's actually 2 maps I used for this, and all of this is kind of somewhat accurate, but not obviously super accurate. So if you're a big Star Wars fan, you may actually complain that, oh, you placed Naboo too close to the center or too far from the center. It's true that I didn't really use a very specific scale here, and I didn't really use very specific dimensions, but overall it kind of is where it is, and I tried my best to make it as accurate as possible. So the first planet, or the first star system we're going to be exploring today, this is of course from episode 1, The Phantom Menace, and where it all starts is of course Naboo. So Naboo is a name of the star, but it's also the name of the planet that episode 1 begins with, and we're going to zoom in on it and see what it looks like. This is essentially what I tried to recreate in this game. Obviously it doesn't look exactly the same. It doesn't really look like Naboo from the movie, and the shadow you see here is actually from one of the moons of Naboo. Now, this is the information I found on the internet. So apparently Naboo has 3 moons. All 3 are uninhabited, and they're called Ohmadun, Rory, and Tassia. And all 3 moons orbit around Naboo, so essentially they're out there, but we don't really know much about them. One of them we get to see in the movie. I think this one right here is actually seen in the movie at some point in episode 1, but I don't really know much else about it. So Naboo here is obviously terraformed. We currently have Earth similarity of 92%, possibility of life of 23%, and obviously there is life forms on here, we just don't really see them. And the life forms that were originally present on Naboo were called Gungans. Or is it Gungans? Well, you know, it's the Jar Jar Binks type. Anyway, so they are probably the most disliked life forms in the entire Star Wars galaxy because of Jar Jar Binks. He unfortunately ruined episode 1 for many people. He made it kind of miserable to watch because he was a little bit too cheesy, but that's obviously personal opinion, not a fact. I did not really enjoy episode 1 because of him, and honestly many people did not as well, but nevertheless he is kind of interesting because there's actually theory about him, and I'm gonna kind of spoil it for you a little bit because those of you who have not seen Star Wars should not be watching this video. But the theory is that originally when episode 1 came out, Jar Jar Binks was actually supposed to be a kind of a similar character to Yoda, and in that sense he was actually supposed to represent, or that's at least the theory, that he was supposed to represent darkest Sith in the galaxy, and he was actually supposed to be the master of Emperor Palpatine. And that's a really interesting theory, because if you do watch the movie, there's a lot of hints on that he's actually a very powerful Force user, but unfortunately, by the time Episode 2 came out, George Lucas decided to change all of this and make him just a silly character that nobody even had to look at anymore, and he replaced his role with the role of Count Dooku, who was played by Christopher Lee, and I believe that's his name. Anyway, so yes, so that's essentially the world of Gungans, and sometime in the past, I think it's something like 850 or 900 years ago, the human colonists arrived on this planet, and they are now referred to as the NABOO, or I guess you can call them Naboonians, and that's basically the humans that we see on this planet. Now, at some point in the past, Gungans and the humans actually had a bit of a fight, and since the humans won that fight, Gungans decided to actually move away from the surface of the planet, and they established various colonies in the oceans and in the seas of the planet, so all of their cities are under the surface. But other than that, they actually stopped fighting. They kind of had a neutral sort of friendship going. And here on this planet, we have lots of sort of peaceful activity going on. We have a somewhat temperate climate. There's a lot of swamps, a lot of plains. And overall, this is actually a pretty pleasant planet to live on. At some point, Anakin Skywalker even says something along the lines of, if I ever was raised on this planet, I would never have left it. Basically, it's an ideal world to live on. And even though a lot of the surface animals and a lot of the surface life on this planet is actually quite peaceful, a lot of the life underneath the planet, specifically in the water, is very, very dangerous. There's a lot of killer creatures, some of them super, super big, some of them are monstrous in size and would basically destroy and kill anything that tries to get in the water. Now, interestingly, this planet is also the home world of some of the more important characters in the Star Wars story, specifically Padme Amidala, who is of course Queen of Naboo, and also Senator Sheev Palpatine, who essentially becomes the Emperor Palpatine, or basically the most evil character in the story. And Queen Amidala is of course the mother of both Luke Skywalker and Leia Skywalker, and so essentially this is the birthplace of most of the stories. So both the good and the bad start on this little planet, and a lot of it stems from here. And during the reign of Emperor Palpatine, he actually established a very important imperial base on this planet, but following his destruction, the Naboo people actually joined the Republic when Princess Leia Organa visited their planet and offered them an alliance. And they actually were very, very happy to join the Republican alliance because they felt quite guilty that Emperor Palpatine was from their planet. And they were kind of felt responsible for all of the evil that he has done in the galaxy. But interestingly, there's actually a sub-story here in the comic books known as Star Wars Shattered Empire. This is a miniseries that was released last year in 2014. And if you read this story, there's actually an interesting fact here where this planet was attacked by the Imperial fleet that tried to actually destroy the climate on this beautiful planet. They tried to use some sort of a special device that was supposed to disrupt its climate and cause this world to be uninhabitable. But of course, someone had to come to the rescue, and that someone was no one else but Lando Calrissian. He actually brought the rebellion fleet with him and destroyed all of the Imperial forces that were orbiting this planet. Anyway, so that's essentially the history of Naboo. And what I wanted to mention about it is that there is other planets we know about in the system that we can actually look at and explore and try to compare them to our solar system as well. So Naboo has two closer planets that are similar to Venus in a sense, but in my case they went a little bit more extreme. So there's a planet called Erep, which is essentially a very, very, very hot world, very close to the main star. And there's another very hot planet called Moth. Both of these planets are uninhabitable and extremely hot. And of course, the third planet from the star is Naboo. Just like Earth, Naboo is sort of like the mirror image of of our home world, and the fourth planet is very similar to Mars, and I actually decided to copy Mars here, and this planet is called Widow. So this is what this planet looks like, but nevertheless it kind of looks a little bit different and is actually, I believe, a little bit colder as well than our actual Mars. And lastly, there is also another gas giant that we know of, and the gas giant is known as Storm, and this is what this particular gas giant looks like. And here I'm gonna accelerate time just to show you if it's, does it spin at all? Oh, it doesn't even, it spins very slowly. But this is the beautiful gas giant that has a very strange orbit around this star, and also has its own sort of a rotational vector as well that is a little bit different from other planets. Anyway, so this is NABOO system, and this is what we know about it from the story, from the movies, and this is why this particular star is kind of important in the Star Wars universe. Even though it has guns and it has Jar Jar Binks, it also has Emperor Palpatine, which of course is a very important character in the story, and of course it has the mother of Luke Skywalker and Leia Skywalker, and at some point Leia Skywalker, although her actual name in the story is of course Leia Organa, visits this planet to try to help NABOO join the Republic. And so that's NABOO in a nutshell, and this is the first star we're going to investigate in this multi-series on the Star Wars universe. In the next part, we're going to take a look at Tatooine, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the characters in the movie and also in the series. Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed this video, and hopefully you'll join me in the next part and learn more about Star Wars universe using Universe Sandbox 2. If you have any other suggestions, or if you know of any other star I should be adding, let me know in the comments below, and I'll try to find as much as I can about it and add it to this beautiful galaxy. And welcome back to episode 2 of Star Wars with Universe Sandbox 2. This is our galaxy that we've created in the last episode, and now you can actually even see the orbits of every star around the galactic center here, which is something that we didn't see in the last episode, but now as soon as I restart the simulation, I can actually see the orbits, which is pretty awesome. Anyway, so we're going to be talking about Tatooine today, and Tatooine is located, so this is usually how you see this sort of a map. There's a galactic center in the middle, there's Coruscant right here, Alderaan, and Tatooine is in this region right here. It's in the outer rim, and it's actually hidden behind the star called Ea. And if I were to zoom into Ea, I would see that right next to it is a relatively insignificant dual star, which is really interesting because this is actually not one star, it's actually 2 stars, and they're both called Tattoo 1 and Tattoo 2. So that's essentially our Tatooine system. I didn't really finish completing this yet. We're going to finish this together, and Tatooine is orbiting around them, and oh, surprisingly very cold though. We need to actually warm up Tatooine a little bit because it is actually the one of the hottest planets we get to experience in the movie, in the series. And of course it kind of looks like Mars, which is why this is sort of Mars, but it's also Tatooine. Now let's warm it up and start talking about Tatooine in Star Wars. Now let's talk about the actual solar system first. So as you can see, there are 2 stars, and they create these really beautiful shadows on the surface of this planet. So instead of having just dawn, dusk, night, and day, you actually have something like 8 different times of day. So here we actually have shadows forming on the surface, and we know that this planet only really has one part of the area in somewhere in the north, specifically the North Pole area, where there is actually humans living in that area, because everything else is extremely hot and it's just too scorchingly hot to survive. So most of the life is in the northern part of the planet, which is why I shifted this planet so the north is actually more in the shadow in comparison to everything else. Now the interesting part here is that because there are 2 stars, I had to figure out how to make this a very stable solar system. So right now you can't really tell, even if I enable orbits, you won't really be able to tell what's going on, but I'm going to show you what's happening here by going to a different simulation. Now, one of these stars is very similar to our sun. It's relatively similar in brightness and relatively similar in shape and mass. It's a G-type main sequence star, but the other star is a little bit less bright. It's the red star you see in the movie, and let's just actually pick something that has a K-type that is a little bit less massive than that. Let's see if we can find one. And here's one called Orlanea, I think. It's a little bit smaller in size as well, and it's a little bit less bright and it's more red. So this is a K-type star. And now, interestingly, if I were to make them orbit in this fashion, so this is a binary system where both planets will be, both stars will be orbiting around each other. If I were to try to place a planet here, and this is one of the videos I've talked about in the past when I was talking about Sirius, I believe. If I try to place a planet like Mars somewhere at a distance of about 1.5 astronomical units, watch what happens. It's really difficult for a planet to actually orbit around a binary system where two stars are relatively close to one another. Now, in the movie, we know they're close because we can see this in the actual picture of Luke Skywalker looking at the stars. They look relatively close. And even though they will be fine orbiting around one another, if I were to accelerate this a little bit, you'll see what happens to Mars. Its orbit is going to destabilize until at some point it's just going to fly out and never return. And this is something I've been experimenting with for many times. And so I had to figure out how, what is the possibility of having Tatooine orbit in a very stable sort of position where it's, it has two stars, but yet it still has a somewhat stable orbit around them. Now, as you can see, this is increasing every time it passes by the stars, and at some point, I think after a few years maybe, it's going to very likely escape into the outer solar system. It happens every time. I've tried this many times, and the closer the stars, the more likely it's going to escape. But its orbit is slowly growing more elliptical and also a little bit more unpredictable than a normal orbit of a planet around a singular star. And you can see it changes so much. Now it's even more elliptical, and it's slowly moving farther and farther away from the star. So this is definitely not what we would have in Star Wars, obviously. And here we go. This is the escape of Mars, also known as Tatooine, from the solar system. All right, so that's not what's happening. So there must be something else. And what I've decided to recreate is this. So first of all, I've placed both Tattoo 1 and Tattoo 2 relatively far away from each other, so they actually have a stable but a far enough orbit of approximately 3 to 4 astronomical units. So this is one of the first things I decided to do, and then I placed the actual planet relatively close to the smaller star, so that it receives most of its radiative heat from the smaller star, but also gets a little bit of heat from the larger star, and this will also enable it to have a really stable orbit around it. So this way, it doesn't really get the gravitational effects from the Tatooine 2, but it does get it stays in orbit around Tatooine 1, but at the same time receives heat from both stars. And this will basically ensure that you get a really hot planet, but at the same time that the scene that you see in Star Wars where Luke Skywalker looks into the sky and sees both stars is also possible. And I'm going to show you how it's possible right here when we reach this particular stage in our orbit. And right around here we go. This is what, no, maybe a little bit more. Here we go. So this is the scene we see in the movie where we have the dark side of the planet, but then on the bright side, if you stand on the surface, you'll actually see, you look into the sky, you'll actually see both stars in the sky like this. So maybe this is a little bit smaller than it was in the movie, but they're close to each other. And if we wait for the sunset, there we go. This is what Luke Skywalker was observing from the surface of Tatooine, and there you go, nighttime. So this is the only way I found to make this system stable enough and to make it realistic enough so that it actually makes sense in the Star Wars universe and in real life as well. But we also know that this planet had 3 moons, and this is something I'm going to place right now. We don't really know much about the moons and what they looked like, or what sort of climate or atmosphere they had, but we know that they were relatively small, so we're going to place 3 smaller moons right here. And there we go. So we have 3 moons orbiting around Tatooine, and the first one is called Gomras San, second one is called Guermassa, and the third one is called Cheninia. We're going to go closer to them just to see what they look like on the surface and what Tatooine looks like from their surface as well. So this is the first moon, and the second moon, and of course the third moon as well. So there you go. This is the beautiful view of Tatooine from the third moon from this system. Now let's actually talk a little bit more about Tatooine and its history as well, and start with the fact that, well, as a desert planet, we know that there's absolutely no water on it. The only water is actually present only in the atmosphere, so the entire human community on Tatooine is essentially so-called water farmers, where they try to use these water extractors to try to produce water from the atmosphere, or basically from any kind of moisture left over in the atmosphere. There's also a lot of really interesting native species on this planet. So Jawas are one of them, the little creatures that are basically the scavengers of this planet now. And what they do for living is essentially scavenge remains of all kinds of mining operations or crashed spaceships that came too close to this planet. Now, the mining operations are here because historically this planet was actually a mining colony that was at some point successful, but then people realized that there was nothing on the inside and only the surface was covered with precious metals. And so most people left the planet and left their equipment behind. We also have Tusken Raiders, which are the people that essentially torture Anakin Skywalker's mother, but we also get to see them in various different scenes in the series. And these are essentially the tribal people native to this planet. And after Anakin Skywalker ends up destroying one of the tribes, they actually start fearing Skywalkers as a kind of an evil spirit, and they actually even create a kind of a spiritual ritual to try to ward off the evil Skywalker demon that killed the entire tribe. Now, of course, this planet is very, very important for Star Wars universe, and specifically because both Anakin Skywalker, Luke Skywalker, and also Obi-Wan Kenobi actually resided on this planet. So Anakin was born here, and as we know from the story, Anakin didn't have a father, and the theory is that he was created by the midichlorians, which are of course the little creatures that reside in Force users in Star Wars universe. And one of the theories is that it's very likely that he was a little experiment of the most powerful Sith in the universe, known as Darth Plagueis, or is it Plagueis? Anyway, so this guy is mentioned by Darth Sidious in one of the Star Wars movies, and he was the master of Darth Sidious, so powerful in fact that he could create life. He could use Force to create life, and which is why Anakin Skywalker tries to acquire this power and wants to save his loved Padme, and wants to basically acquire this power and becomes a Sith. And so the theory behind Anakin Skywalker is that this Darth Plagueis actually possibly created him, which is why he had no father, which is why only the mother is ever mentioned in the series. But of course, just like many theories, this is just a speculation right now, and we might not even find out if this is true until sometime in the future when new Star Wars come out. So this planet is also, of course, the home planet of Luke Skywalker, who was brought here by Obi-Wan Kenobi to try to protect him from Darth Sidious and Darth Vader. And Luke grew up on a moisture farm, and he was raised by his extended family, and specifically this was actually the stepson of his mother, Shmi Skywalker. And he obviously had no idea that he was a Force user, and Obi-Wan Kenobi tried to protect him from all of this. But obviously the fate caught up with him when two little droids, R2-D2 and 3CPO, crashed on this planet. And we can actually simulate a little crash here. And here comes the little crash, and as they crashed on this planet, ooh, things go wrong. I don't know what just happened, but the planet started spinning a little bit faster than it should have. This is, by the way, Alpha 18, and I think there's been new additions, but also new bugs introduced into the game. And one of the bugs is that you'll notice that some of my objects start wobbling too much. I don't know what's happening here, but you can kind of see the wobble as I move around. And yeah, now my Tatooine is spinning a little bit too fast. I need to slow it down a little. And so anyway, as these droids crashed on the planet, the Skywalker family decided to purchase them, and this is how the entire series starts. This was from Star Wars The New Hope, episode 4. Interestingly, what most people forget is that 3CPO was actually made by Anakin Skywalker, Luke Skywalker's father. So when 3CPO returns to Luke Skywalker, it's kind of an interesting reunification of his father's creation, and obviously Luke Skywalker, who has no idea that 3CPO was made by his father on this planet. So Tatooine is also the birthplace of 3CPO. Now, this planet also has some really interesting wildlife. So there is something called sarlaccs, which are not just on this planet, but in other planets as well. But on this planet, sarlacc is the large creature that swallows Boba Fett when Luke Skywalker tries to save Han Solo from Jabba the Hutt. And sarlaccs are actually plants. It's not even an animal, it's a plant that just sits there and swallows things as they fall into it. And one creature that I would really like to see in one of the future movies that still we haven't seen in any of the series and is only present in Star Wars video games is, of course, the Krayt dragon. This is a huge animal, huge carnivorous animal that is essentially the most dangerous animal on this planet. And the only time we hear it being mentioned is when Obi-Wan Kenobi actually simulates the sound of a Krayt dragon, to try to scare off the Tusken Raiders when Luke Skywalker is attacked by them. So this is the only time we even realize that Krayt dragon actually is a thing on this planet. But if you've ever played any games with Star Wars universe in them, you may have seen the size of that creature. It's actually really, really huge, and it'd be nice to see it sometime in this series. And in terms of politics, this planet is actually controlled by the Hutt cartel, so it's sort of a criminal mastermind that controls this planet. And of course, this criminal mastermind was Jabba the Hutt. But after his murder by Leia Skywalker, who actually strangles him during the rescue of Han Solo, this planet was now sort of liberated and became without any kind of leadership. But of course, one of the Hutts will probably take over this planet at some point, and it will most likely return to being a criminal sort of base for one of the Hutts or some other criminal that decides to settle here and call this planet their home. But considering the iconic images from this planet and how beautiful it actually looks in Star Wars, most people don't actually realize that a lot of these images are from our planet Earth. So most of the things that we see on Tatooine were shot in a country called Tunisia, and of course most of them are still available, and you can actually go there and take pictures with these little clay houses or other structures that you see in the movies in real life. And I've posted a link in the description below that shows you on Google Maps a link to each of these locations that we see in the movies as well. And interestingly, Tatooine is actually the name of a town in Tunisia, which is sort of what this planet is named after. And so is Naboo, and both Naboo and Tatooine are little places in Tunisia that actually exist in real life. And I think this is all I wanted to mention about Tatooine and about its importance in Star Wars universe. And while I'm watching Alpha 18 causing some bugs here to my beautiful Tatooine, let's actually watch Gormassa smack into Tatooine as it approaches it. And this actually happened by itself. I didn't really do anything to it, and it's clearly a bug in the game that is relatively fun to watch. Look at what it's doing. It's actually okay, that's normal, that's absolutely normal, but it's being swallowed by Tatooine, and there we go, it's gone forever. So yes, and essentially this is what would happen if one of the moons of Tatooine decided to pay a close visit to the planet and smack into it. It's moving a little bit too fast, and we're gonna decrease its speed. And interestingly, this little collision even brought water to this planet now, so we now have clouds and a little bit of water on the surface, but we're going to remove this just to make it more realistic, because Tatooine has no water except for some of it in the atmosphere. So essentially, this is what I wanted to talk about in this video. I wanted to mention Tatooine and its importance in the series, and tell you a little bit more about the actual solar system where Tatooine is located, talk about its moons, and obviously give you a little bit of history behind this planet and how it might actually come back in one of the future Star Wars series. Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Star Wars with Universe Sandbox 2, and today we're going to be talking about a very, very important planet in the Star Wars universe. Specifically, we're going to be talking about Coruscant, or is it CORUSCANT, as my Google Translate tells me? Well, here's actually a really interesting fact about this particular word. Coruscant is an actual word in English, and it sort of means glittering or shiny, and that's because if you were to actually look at the planet, and here's an image of it, it does have a little bit of glitter going on in it, because there's a lot of things and structures and lights that create this effect. Now, in the actual universe, though, in Star Wars universe, and specifically in the canon of Star Wars, it's actually pronounced as Coruscant. Now, people obviously argue about it, but it's Coruscant. It's not CORUSCANT, as it is pronounced in some of the earlier Star Wars video games, specifically TIE Fighter, which is actually one of my most favorite games, but there's one character in there that keeps saying Coruscant, and it just makes me so angry. Anyway, so it's Coruscant, and we're talking about Coruscant Prime, the star, and obviously the system where the planet is located. Now, this is the galaxy we've used the last time. I haven't really changed much, except for, of course, I've added a lot of different objects in Coruscant Prime. Now, as you can see, this is actually right in the center of the galaxy, or I guess close to the center, and it is considered to be the galactic center in Star Wars universe, specifically for the coordinate sakes. Coruscant Prime is actually known as 000. It's basically the zero location. This is where all of the other galactic locations are calculated from. So basically this is our center, and this is of course because this is basically the capital of both the Empire and the Republic, and all of the other previous republics and empires used this particular planet and particular system as their main center. And so here I'm gonna show you what this looks like. I'm gonna enable orbits for a second. Basically this is what we have. So there's actually several objects orbiting around the main star called Coruscant Prime. There is actually quite a lot of planets here, and many of them are inhabitable and inhabited. And let's talk about the closer planets first, because these are the ones that we probably don't really get to see or hear much about because they're just too hot. So there's one called Revis or Revis. I'm not really sure how to pronounce this one because it's never really mentioned. And it's a super hot planet. We can actually zoom into it. It's even hotter than Mercury. It's basically essentially molten because it's just really close to the main star. The second planet, also very hot, called Platoril or Platoril. And here it's basically this one. In this game, at least, it's completely dark. It's very black and very scary. Then we have two more really hot planets, and here the names are not as creative. One is called Vandor 1, and the second one is called Vandor 2. And so this is Vandor 2, and the third one is called Vandor 3, and this is actually the only planet, or one of the other planets, that is actually actively mentioned in Star Wars. And this is where a lot of the training takes place for many clones during the Clone Wars. So this is actually sort of like the training planet, because it is relatively hot here. It's a very harsh environment, and so a lot of soldiers during the wars use this for training. So this is the first 5 planets, and the 6th planet is Coruscant. And here we're gonna zoom into it, and we'll notice that, okay, my moon is escaping. That's not good. It has 4 moons. It has 3 moons called Centax, Centax 1, Centax 2, and Centax 3. And it has a 4th moon called Hesperidium. Now, the interesting fact about Hesperidium is that this is sort of like the vacation center for all of the rich people from Coruscant. Many people have their sort of villas here. Many people have their beautiful holiday spots, and basically this is where people come for a rest. This is of course until somewhere down the storyline, at least in the extended universe in the books, something happens, but I'm not going to spoil this for you. But basically, yeah, this is the vacation spot. This is the super awesome, super expensive moon where people go for a rest. Now, Coruscant we're going to come back to in a second, but you'll notice that here, this is what makes it Coruscant. What makes it really shiny, what makes it really sort of glittering, is the fact that there's actually many different lights, and this is what it looks like in the movie. Here's the picture of it. Basically, there's lights on the surface because this is actually a super massive mega city. We're going to come back to this in a second. Let's just talk about other planets first. Oh, by the way, the reason why there's actually lights on the surface is because for some unknown reason in the game, when you add a random terrestrial planet, or random rocky planet, some of them will have these lights on the surface. Now, I don't know if this is a bug, and if it is, it's an awesome bug because it actually creates this really cool effect. But the thing is, as soon as I start the game, as soon as I make it play, they'll actually disappear. So this is why my game is paused right now, because I wanted to keep this effect. I'm going to show you later on how it disappears as well. Anyway, so this is Coruscant, and then after Coruscant we have 2 gas giants. We have one called Muscov. I'm gonna go with Muscov. I like how this sounds, and it has 21 moons around it, so it's kind of similar to Jupiter in a sense. A little bit smaller than Jupiter, and if you zoom in, this is kind of what it looks like. And we don't really know much about it, but some battles did take place around this planet. And then after Muskov, we have Stantat, and this one has 23 moons, so it's a little bit more than Muskov. And here, nothing really special happens in Star Wars movies or Star Wars books, but obviously some battles do take place here as well. Now, in between the gas giants and the next planet, there's really almost nothing. But there's another planet here that's really cold, and it's actually called Improco. Now, the actual planet, we don't know much about it, but the moon of Improco is known as the frozen moon of Improco. And on this particular planet, there's actually some really interesting things happen. Specifically, there's apparently some sort of a secret storage for the Galactic Republic, and I believe the Empire as well. And on this frozen moon and frozen planet, there's some secret vaults filled with, you know, treasures or some sort of a knowledge, or basically something that's really important for the Republic or the Empire. So this is a really important sort of a moon that's away from Coruscant. And the last planet here is called Nabatu, and Nabatu is not particularly important in the actual series, but we know that it does have rings. It has a lot of frozen rings and various rocky rings around it, and I didn't make that many because I didn't want to slow down my game too much, but we can obviously add more by going into add rings, and I have them preset here, and we can actually change this a little bit just so that it looks a little bit better. And we can add them right about here. There we go. So a little bit more rings, and looks slightly better, but not as good as it would be if I added a lot of rings. But anyway, we don't want to slow down the game, so let's not do that yet. And so basically, this is the Coruscant Prime system. Very interesting system. Very lots of different planets, lots of different people living here as well. And of course, this is the Cultural Center, the Empire and the Republic Center, and the Center of Military as well. So this is why there's a military training center on Vendor 3. Now, going back to the actual planet, on Coruscant, we know that there is actually 1 trillion, or at least 1 trillion residents. In comparison, today on Earth, there is something like close to 8 billion people. We're talking about 1 trillion. That's basically 2 more zeros, multiplied by 100. So this is how many people there are on this particular planet. And the actual idea of this super planet and the planet is basically one big city is technically from Isaac Asimov, the really ancient science fiction writer who came up with many different concepts, and one of them was, of course, a planet that's essentially one mega city. And so George Lucas, when he was making Star Wars trilogy, the original trilogy, he decided to kind of implement that. And the original plan was to make Alderaan this particular planet, but due to the constraints of filming and technology, they actually weren't able to recreate this. And so they had to settle for the Death Star as being a kind of a city and a region where they would have all of their battles. And Alderaan was simply made a homeworld of Princess Leia Organa and was destroyed by the Death Star. And only in the Episode 1, Episode 2, and Episode 3 of Star Wars do we actually get to see Coruscant. So the first time we get to see this planet is during the Phantom Menace, where I believe we get to actually kind of get a glimpse of the planet. Then we get to see the speeder chase, where Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi are pursuing the wannabe assassins. And during that pursuit, we get to see most of the city. We get to see the different speeders. We get to see all kinds of districts, and of course the general feel of what the city feels like. And lastly, in Episode 3, we actually get to see the planet from the outside, where the actual opening battle takes place above Coruscant, where the forces of Count Dooku try to basically destroy the Republic and try to take control of Coruscant. But I think it's best if we actually explore this particular planet from the surface, and to do this I'm going to actually use another game called Star Wars The Old Republic, where we do get to explore the planet in quite a lot of detail, and we also get to learn a little bit more about it by finding various historical artifacts. And you definitely should try this game later on if you get a chance. But so I'm gonna basically go through the planetary surface and show you what it looks like, and of course talk a little bit more about it. And the first thing I want to talk about is of course the speeders, and This is me getting into one of these things. And basically here, the first question I always ask myself when I saw the scene from the original, or not the original, but the more recent trilogy is, you know, do they crash? And what happens if they do crash? And here, actually, there's a whole discussion about it where people are convinced that the crashes are extremely rare. Specifically because the most of the vehicles here have a very, very complex auto-navigation system that moves these speeders along a really complex pre-programmed route. And a lot of the taxis here are able to travel at speeds of up to 190 kilometers per hour or about 130 miles per hour, and drivers can receive special permission to leave the programmed skylanes and basically take shortcuts. And the other interesting thing about this city planet is, of course, the levels. So think of this city as basically layered in levels from 1 to, I think the highest one is 5,127. Now, the higher your status is and the more rich you are, the higher level you live on, or basically work on, or whatever. And most of the time, of course, we get to see only higher levels because we deal with, you know, emperors, senate, we deal with really important people. So we don't get to see the lower levels of the city unless, of course, you play video games. In video games like Star Wars The Old Republic or older games like Knights of the Old Republic, you actually get to experience Coruscant Underworld, you get to experience the lower levels, and this is where things are really, really interesting. Specifically, apparently level 1 on this planet is so dangerous and so scary that it's completely uninhabitable. At least that's its official recognition. It's uninhabitable, but obviously there are people and there are obviously creatures living there. And the lower 1,000 levels or so are known as the Coruscant Underworld. This is basically where all of the crime happens, where all of the underworld crime lords live, and where most of the people are from generally lower class. But at the same time, at the lower levels, you're actually forced to have only artificial light. There's actually no sunlight that gets there. And you're also forced to breathe the air of toxic fumes from factories and all kinds of vehicular waste, and specifically from waste that comes from the top. But at the same time, this is where most of the fun things in Star Wars stories actually happen. So a lot of the things actually do happen in the lower levels of Coruscant, and most of the manipulation, intrigue, and all of the planning of the assassinations or galactic conquests obviously happen here in the lower levels. Now, the other thing that's actually present on this planet is, of course, the Jedi Temple, which is ironically built on top of the really ancient Sith Temple that was destroyed by the Jedis earlier on in history. And this is where young Padawans get to basically learn to become Jedi Knights, and where the High Jedi Council was. This is also the council we get to see in the Episode 2 and Episode 3 of Star Wars. But of course, this later becomes the Imperial Temple when all of the Jedis are killed in Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. And of course, this temple is later captured by the newly born Darth Vader, who of course used to be Anakin Skywalker, and he captures the Jedi Temple while actually murdering everything and everyone inside the temple. And this is probably the saddest scene you'll get to even see in the entire Star Wars movie, where he enters the temple and decides to destroy everything. And this is of course the day when Jedi Temple became the Imperial Palace. And this planet has such a rich history that I think I would actually recommend reading more about it by yourself, because there's just so many things happen and so many of them are spoilers that I don't want to say anymore, because things just happen and they go wrong for this planet for many years, even after the Battle of Endor, which ends Episode 6 of Star Wars. And I think this is such an amazing planet, and it's so different from everything else in Star Wars universe, and actually any other science fiction book or series or movie that I actually really enjoy being here. This is a planet that's essentially one large city with like 1 trillion different sentient beings on it, and just the idea of having such a large city is absolutely incredible. As I mentioned before, this idea is based on a world called Trantor, and this was from a book called Foundation Series by Isaac Asimov, who basically wrote these awesome science fiction books where he talks about something very similar. And in his books, he even describes this concept, and this is actually based on a Greek concept called Ecumenopolis, which basically stands for a very large planetary-sized city. And so this idea is really interesting. I'm really surprised more science fiction books don't explore it in more detail. But anyway, before we finish, I just wanted to stop by saying, so if you've watched the first 6 movies of Star Wars, you may actually wonder, so what happens to this planet after the Battle of Endor? What happens after the second Death Star is destroyed and the Emperor is killed and Darth Vader is also basically dead? And what happens to the Republic and what happens to the actual planet is that it does lose its status of being the center. And what the New Republic decides to do is, instead of focusing on just one world as being their center, specifically Coruscant, they choose to move the capital based on the member worlds that are part of the New Republic Senate. So the new capital would always be moved depending on who the members of the Senate are. And this way they obviously wanted to prevent any kind of possible new empire from being formed, and of course wanted to actually make it more fair for other Senatory members to basically have the same kind of power like everyone else. Hello and welcome to episode 4 of Star Wars with Universe Sandbox 2. In today's video we're going to be talking about a system called TYTHON. This is the system that's probably one of the more important systems in terms of history of Star Wars and history of Jedi Order, and specifically there's a planet called TYTHON on it that we're going to be discussing in more detail. But before we start, let's just see where this system is located in comparison to everything else. So we have our Hoth right there, Naboo is here, Tatooine is in this region, Kashyyyk is right here, Coruscant, the central black hole, and between the black hole and Coruscant there is a little system called TYTHON. Now, interestingly, on most maps related to Star Wars, you'll notice that there's actually no galactic pathways going to this particular star, and that's because officially the way to this star has actually been lost, because it actually does play an important role in Star Wars universe. Many times did Jedi Order and or Sith actually try to make this planet secret, and at the same time it's actually kind of difficult to find because there's so many other stars in this region that most people, most Jedi and most Sith today, and when I say today I mean in the times of episode 7, The Force Awakens, would not actually be able to locate this particular system anymore. Anyway, so yes, it's a really interesting system, and here there's actually quite a lot of different planets. I'm going to show you how many specifically, and this is what it looks like from the outside, and we're going to be discussing each of these planets and focusing on specifically on TYTHON at the end of the video. Now, so the star is actually called TYTHON. It's very similar to the Sun, and around it has 11 different planets, with most of planets being completely colonized or actually habitable. Now the first one is called Sunspot. This is actually a really interesting planet. I'm going to show you in a second why. As soon as I accelerate time a little bit, you'll notice that this is actually the only planet in the system that has a retrograde, and let me just disable this for a second, retrograde motion in comparison to everything else. So all of the stars have counterclockwise motion and Sunspot has a clockwise motion. For this reason, many early Jedi scientists, if that's a thing, actually went to this planet trying to investigate if it was captured from somewhere else in the universe, and that's probably what happened. It probably just flew by TYTHON relatively close and got captured into its gravitational field, but is orbiting against the flow. And there's a period right here, and that's somewhere around this time, when Sunspot comes very close to the next planet called Maltera, and because of this, apparently Maltera gets ridiculously high seasonal changes and things like volcanic eruptions and so on and so forth. Basically, Maltera suffers every time Sunspot comes close to it, and this of course happens every week or so. So basically, when this occurs, Maltera gets crazy volcanic eruptions and a lot of other unfortunate events. But Sunspot itself is actually a really hot world. Basically here, even though there are actually colonies somewhere in the poles that are responsible for mining, because this is actually apparently a mining colony, this is actually a really dangerous world to live on, and has a lot of volcanic eruptions, a lot of volcanic activity, and of course earthquakes. But all of the miners that are on this planet have to basically live in very harsh conditions, wearing environmental suits just to survive on this planet. And apparently 10% of them actually usually die. But the reason this planet is actually very important in Star Wars universe is that the two very important materials that are responsible for fueling the faster than light travel are located on this planet. I'm sure there are actually other planets that have those materials, but this was originally the planet used to produce these materials that are used to power ships' interstellar drives. And the next planet, called Maltera, is also a mining colony, and in this game it's particularly beautiful. Look at those shiny effects that we have. So Maltera is also a mining colony in TYTHON system. And even though it's a little bit less hot than Sunspot, it's still pretty hot here, and unfortunately does suffer from those extreme effects every time Sunspot comes close to it. Now, planet number 3 is a little bit different. This planet is called Nox, and this is actually a manufacturing planet. So a lot of the things that are mined on the first 2 planets are then brought here, where they are manufactured. And by the way, all of these planets have habitants on them, and they're actually called Tythons. These were originally from TYTHON, the planet we'll talk about in more detail in a few minutes. But many of them migrated to these other planets for a reason I'll explain to you in a few minutes as well. Anyway, so this is Nox, and all of the inhabitants were actually living inside domed-like colonies here. So it's super hot here as well, and this planet is actually very, very polluted. And we're gonna actually try to see if we can increase the pollution a little bit by possibly adding a bunch of stuff in the atmosphere here, and not just pretend that this is pollution flying around. And so because of this pollution, this planet is actually used to manufacture some of the more hazardous materials in the Star Wars universe. And basically this planet is already so polluted that they decided they're going to produce more pollutable stuff and pollutable materials on it. The next planet is called Krafkor, or Krafkur if you want to be more French about it. And this is another planet that has very dry, very arid climate, and basically is also very hot. And it's so hot, in fact, that apparently no creature can actually live on the surface of this planet without any kind of protection. But what this planet is famous for is these large blue crystals that apparently are mined here. And it has a lot of inactive volcanoes that you kind of can see on the surface here. But interestingly, it does have breathable atmosphere, which I'm not sure if I added here. And I did add breathable atmosphere, except I added a little bit too much. Let's decrease it a little bit. And what's really, really cool about it is that apparently inside this planet, underneath the surface, there is all of these caverns that are filled with lakes and plants and literally jungles with animals and stuff. Basically, there's a lot of life underneath the surface. And planet number 5 is the most important planet here, and this is TYTHON. Now, TYTHON is very similar in its appearance to Earth, and I'm going to show you more of TYTHON when we play Star Wars The Old Republic at the end. But basically, this is the planet that is the home of the Jedi Order, and we'll talk about this near the end of the video as well, just after I finish exploring everything else in the system. And TYTHON has 2 moons. One is called Ashla, which is a very bright whitish moon, and one is called Bogan, which is a darker brownish, I guess, color of rust and blood kind of a moon. And these 2 moons are essentially their representation of the light and the dark side of the Force. So originally, historically, when the first Jedi actually came to this particular planet, they noticed that there were 2 moons representing these 2 sides of the Force. And TYTHON is apparently the strongest planet in terms of the Force. It actually, for some unknown reason, has a very strong affiliation with the Force and has a very kind of a strong richness of the Force. And when they settled on this planet, they realized, so these 2 moons represent 2 sides of the Force, and they've actually used these 2 moons to, well, first of all, they're colonized, and second is that they've used them for different types of meditation. We'll talk more about this later on. So basically, yes, so this is TYTHON. Now let's keep moving, and this is planet number 5. And planet number 6 is called Kalimar. Now, this planet has 3 moons orbiting around it. We don't really know what the names are, but I just kind of randomly generated these 3 moons. And, oh, this is a really beautiful moon. Look at that. Oh, this is so pretty and pink. Anyway, so Kalimar is actually the home of the non-Force sensitive Tythons, people from this particular solar system. So anyone who was not able to survive on TYTHON moved to Kalimar, and Kalimar is very similar to Coruscant in a sense, in that it's actually a metropolis. It's a planet that's also a city, and which is why you see all of these lights everywhere. These are city lights. It's a business and also religious center of this system, and it boasts, high density, well-integrated population, and basically it's made out of metal for the most part, and has really tall city-like spires everywhere, and is also actually known as the Jewel of Titan system. So it's not really the Titan that's more important, it's actually Kalimar that's the most important planet in this particular system in terms of political power. Titan, on the other hand, is the force center, not only of this system, but actually possibly even the entire Star Wars universe, or galaxy, that is. And so Titan, the interesting thing about it is that if you're not force sensitive, you cannot survive on Titan. Apparently, it's so powerful in the force that anyone who's not force sensitive would actually most likely perish. The comparison that the Star Wars writers use when they describe this is basically, imagine you're a fish in the water, so you can easily live on Titan if Titan is covered in water. But if you're not a fish and if you don't breathe water, then you will not be able to survive here. Basically, think of the force as the water, and it's covering the whole Titan. So anyone who's not force sensitive obviously kind of dies there. And for this reason, non-force sensitive Titans, people from the system, move to the other planets and the moons around Titan. So the next planet is called Shikakwa, with 2 A's, with double A in the middle, and it's a pretty interesting name and pretty interesting planet as well. It looks very beautiful from this angle. And this planet is also a planet with breathable atmosphere, and it's actually covered by land masses and lots of oceans, which you see right here. But just like Tatooine, this particular planet that only has 1 moon is actually governed by the criminal overlords. Basically, it's a criminal monarchy. And so it's not really controlled by the previous planet I talked about, which is Kalimar. It has its own government, and this government is criminal in a sense. And next planet is called Skagora. Skagora has 1 moon as well, and this is sort of a forest planet, very similar to, I guess, Endor that we get to see in episode 6 of Star Wars. But on the surface, specifically in the atmosphere, there's actually these city ships that float around the atmosphere, and basically that's where most of the population of Skagora lives. They live in these city ships because it's a little bit too uncomfortable to live on the surface. And the surface is basically all covered in forests, swamps, very large apex trees, and a lot of different wetlands. So basically, it's a planet that species like Wookiees might appreciate, but for humans, it's a little bit difficult to survive there. Now, all of these planets I've just talked about, at least most of them, are actually in the habitable zone, which is why they have really nice climates. So everything from Titan to Skagora, these 4 planets are actually, they have temperate climates, and they have really good atmosphere, really good temperature. So it's very easy to settle and live on them. But the planets closer to Titan are obviously too hot, and the planets further away from it are obviously too cold. So let's explore the last 3 planets, and the next 2 are actually called the giants, and these 2 giants are obviously 2 gas giants. Now, the first one is called Aubrey. This is what Aubrey looks like, and Aubrey has 3 moons, so it's actually a little bit smaller than any of the gas giants that we have in our solar system. It's probably on the smaller side. So here its mass is only about 8 times mass of Earth, and Aubrey doesn't really have anything special about it, except for there's 1 moon that's known in the Star Wars universe, and it's a volcanic moon called Zeris. It does appear in one of the comic books. Although I don't remember what happens on it, and I'm not going to spoil it for you anyway. Next we have Mor, or is it Maur? Mor. It's an angry-looking, angry-sounding gas giant. It's a little bit bigger than Aubrey, and this here has a mass of almost 10 Earths, and it has 7 different moons around it. And all of these moons on both of these gas giants are actually established colonies where a lot of different materials are actually mined, and a lot of the material is obviously gas because this is also a gas giant. But the idea here is that every object in the solar system is actually inhabited by some kind of a species, although altogether they're known as Titans. And it actually represents many different races. It's not just humans, it's actually many races that came here originally when the original Jedi Order settled on Titan. And the last planet here is simply known as Fury's Gate, and this is the outermost planet in the Titan system. Basically a barren world. It's only about 1/3 size of Titan, so it's about 24 times the size of the moon. And it's one of the few planets that is unsettled, but it does have a space station in orbit around this planet. So people do come on the surface, but basically most people live on a station that sort of orbits around this planet. And we can try to maybe represent this by putting something in orbit around this. Let's just put a random asteroid and name it Orbital Station. And there we go. So this is the orbital station where most of the population of this particular planet lives. And this somewhat cold red world is also actually a scientific research station where a lot of different research in this particular system is being done. So essentially, this is the 11 planets from this particular system, a really important system in the Star Wars universe, but a system that we don't really get to hear about until very recently. I believe the first time people actually got to read about this system and its planets is when Star Wars The Old Republic, the video game, came out, and it did describe many of these planets in a lot of detail. But many of these planets are mentioned in the extended universe, and many of these planets are also talked about in different comic books based on the Star Wars universe. And let's talk a little bit about TYTHON and its history using this game right here, which is Star Wars The Old Republic. So TYTHON is the planet where originally the so-called Great Pyramids known as Thoyor landed, bringing a bunch of pilgrims to this particular planet. And here what Thoyor were, they were essentially like flying temples where the original Jedi Order was actually living and also training a lot of its disciples. And when these pyramids landed on TYTHON, they actually brought with them a lot of different species from across the galaxy, because a lot of different species were force sensitive and they were training on these pyramids. And so this Jedi Order actually was a little bit different from Jedi Order. What the Jedi believed in was the balance of the Force. They actually believed in the balance between the light and the dark Force, and they liked this planet for two reasons. One is that because its moons were kind of light and dark, and Ashla and Bogan are these two moons that represented the light and the dark side of the Force, but also because TYTHON was so strong in the Force. And like I mentioned before, anyone who was not Force sensitive could not survive on this planet. And what happened when one of the Jedi disciples became too light or too dark, they would actually have to go to one of those moons and use them for kind of meditation purposes. So for example, if you suddenly became too dark, you would have to go to Bogan and think about what you've done and look at Ashla, the bright moon, and try to get rebalanced in the Force. But interestingly, this planet was also very sensitive to the Force from really powerful beings. So even though this planet did achieve balance of the Force at some point, whenever someone really powerful in one side of the Force arrived to this planet, it would actually throw the entire planet into chaos. And because the planet itself was so sensitive to the Force, it would actually cause a lot of things like earthquakes and volcanic eruptions and basically all kinds of devastating effects that the planet would produce because of the disturbance in the Force. So for example, if one day Darth Vader decided to visit this particular planet, it would most likely cause ridiculously strong force storms and ground quakes, earthquakes, and basically devastate the surface of this planet. Oh, and one thing I forgot to mention is the timeline here. So the original pyramid arrival was 36,000 years before Luke Skywalker and before the Battle of Endor. And so this is actually a really long time ago, even before the Old Republic games. But something like 10,000 years after their arrival, there was a really evil sort of species called Rakata that we get to experience in the Old Republic games that do arrive to this planet and essentially throw its balance into chaos. And here we have a lot of battles, a lot of wars that start, and essentially this was the end of Jedi Order and the birth of the Jedi Order, because following the so-called Force Wars, where the light side and the dark side of the Jedi Order basically faced off against each other, and the light side actually won this battle. So the light side realized that it's all about the light force, not the dark force, and they actually decided to form this order called Jedi Order, which is how the Jedi Order was born. And this was approximately 25,700 years before the war between the Galactic Empire and the Rebellion that we get to see in the movies. And so the original Jedi Temple and the original Jedi groups were all located on this particular planet. But following a few more conflicts and wars, they actually did move their temple to a new planet called Ossus, and then they moved to Coruscant. Basically, this is where the Jedi Order became the Jedis that we know today, and the old Jedi Order was essentially dismantled and turned into Sith and the Jedi. But interestingly, you actually get to see some of the remnants of this old world. If you play the Star Wars The Old Republic here, some of the enemies are actually called Flesh Raiders, and these are sort of the mutated, evolved versions of the Rakata that caused the original Force Wars that basically led to the fall of the Jedi Order and the birth of Jedi and the Sith. So a lot of the old remnants, a lot of the old ruins that you get to visit here are all sort of historical representations of this old world that used to be here. But like I mentioned before, at the present time in the episode 7, The Force Awakens, and all the previous episodes, this planet is no longer really used that much. It's been abandoned by the Jedi, and it's been abandoned by many different other species, mostly because of the constant conflicts that essentially caused the Force on this planet to become really unstable and very dangerous for anyone who steps on the surface. There it is, so isolated that it makes up its own system, marooned in space as if the other planets have chosen to hide from it. This is Obi-Wan Kenobi talking about the planet of Korriban, also known as Pesagam, also known as Moraband in one of the Clone Wars movies. And this particular planet, just like the planet we talked about in the previous video, is really strong in the Force, but this time it's actually really strong in the Dark Force. Korriban is known as the homeworld of the Sith. Now let's actually start with the system itself before we talk about Korriban. And the system here is called Horusat. If you zoom out, and I'll show you where this is located. If you zoom out, you'll notice that it's actually on the outer rim. It's really far away from everything else. So if this is the center of the galaxy, and this is TYTHON, and this is Coruscant, Yavin is right here, and here is Horusat. Horusat is located in the Sith systems, and basically this is where a lot of the Sith are. And this system really only has one planet with 2 ring systems, which is actually really interesting. This ring system right here has a name. It's called Coruscant, and this one on the outskirts is called the Ashes of Kor. And even though it's not really explained in any of the Star Wars legends how these 2 rings were formed, it's very possible that these were either destroyed planets, basically planets that were destroyed by one of the wars that the system participated in, or very likely that these were actually supposed to form into planets, but something prevented them from doing that. Now, in our solar system, the reason why we have the asteroid belt is because Jupiter, or Jupiter's mass specifically, is actually responsible for preventing from the planets from forming, or the planet from forming. And here, it's very likely that it's actually the Force, specifically the Force of Korriban, that somehow prevented these 2 planets from forming. Now, obviously, this is not a scientific explanation. This is more of a Star Wars science explanation. But it's actually quite possible that the Force of Korriban is so strong that it prevented these 2 planets from forming and was essentially the only planet in this particular system. Now, if we zoom in on Korriban, we'll notice that there's actually a lot of moons that it has. We don't really know the names of the moons, so all of these are randomly generated, but it actually has 7 moons, which is really interesting, which means that a lot of the material during the creation of this particular solar system went into... let me just disable this for a second. Went into creation of these moons, and is very likely deposited either inside Korriban or in these moons that it has. And we don't really know much about the system or the moons because most of the Star Wars legends don't really focus on the moons or anything else in the solar system except for the actual Korriban. But all we know is that this particular planet is actually quite massive. As a matter of fact, well, we don't really know its mass, and all of this is actually calculated by the game, but we know its size. Its diameter is about 16,000 kilometers. Also, its gravity is about 1.4 times the gravity of Earth. And we know that 1 year on Korriban is about 2 years on Earth. We also know that this planet has a very arid and dry look, so there's no actual waters or any kind of forest on the surface. It's basically orangey in color, but it's also not particularly warm. It's possibly quite cold actually, because Without any water on the surface, it's probably very unlikely that this planet can actually maintain a higher temperature, so it's possibly relatively cold here, kind of similar to deserts on our planet Earth. Now essentially this is what the system looks like, and this is what this planet looks like, and let's actually explore this in a little bit more detail by using Star Wars The Old Republic, because you do get to play on Korriban, and it's actually the first planet that you start on if you start as the Sith. And so this is what Korriban looks like in the game. It's actually relatively beautiful. It's a kind of a desolate place, though. It has lots of mountains, lots of different desert-looking places. But by the time that we experience in the movies, this world actually has been already abandoned after many ancient wars. There's quite a lot of different wars that were fought on this planet, and too many to list actually. But at the same time, this was also a final resting place for many different leaders of the Sith, and it was actually supposed to be the resting place of Darth Sidious as well, the guy we get to see in a Star Wars movie. He actually came to this planet at some point to try to get more knowledge and more power, but what he faced were the ghosts of the old Sith that actually tormented him to the point of him almost being destroyed. So various spirits of this old Sith are actually still on this planet, and they actually have quite a lot of power. But interestingly, Darth Vader was actually supposed to be buried here, and he even had a tomb that was constructed for him by the slaves that were on this planet. But let's not rush ahead and start with a bit of important history. So here we actually need to know about someone called Darth Bane, and he was the Sith Lord that created so-called Rule of Two, which basically governs the entire Sith mentality. And here it's a really simple rule. The rule is that at any time, anywhere in the galaxy, there's only supposed to be two Sith. There's always the master and there's always the apprentice. Now this is what we get to see in all of the movies, and for this reason Sith actually thought they were the chosen ones in the Force, because there's actually only about 30 of them that we get to know about in the entire Star Wars canon, and that's in comparison to like thousands of Jedi that we get to see. And interestingly, because of this rule of two, with every generation of Sith, they would actually get more and more powerful. So the idea here was that when the apprentice becomes more powerful than the master, the apprentice would then kill the master and would become the new overlord or the new master, and then this master would choose a new apprentice that would hopefully one day gain enough power to do the same to him. So it's actually a really interesting ideology where in order for them to become more powerful, they had to choose the right apprentice, and they knew that they would actually perish. So when Darth Sidious chose Darth Vader, he knew that one day Darth Vader would kill him. And in episode 2 of Star Wars, Palpatine tells Anakin Skywalker about Darth Plagueis, who used to be a really powerful Sith who could even control life, who could actually resurrect people. And he tells him about his apprentice that actually kills him in his sleep. And that apprentice is, of course, Darth Sidious, which obviously means that Darth Sidious became more powerful than Darth Plagueis. And so that's basically how this rule of two and how the entire Sith ideology works. And all of this obviously started on this planet when the first Sith Temple and the first Sith Order was born. Now, interestingly, Sith actually used to be a race, and specifically they were a race of red-skinned people with little tentacles on their faces. This is actually my character. My character is a Sith. But at some point, after one of the Jedi Wars, and that we're talking about the Jedi Wars, some of the fallen Jedi from Jedi Order came to this planet and actually started to be worshipped by the Sith for their powers, and basically they became like the godlike symbols, and all of these pyramids were built in their honor by the Sith race. And sometime later, after the arrival of these Jedi, they actually started interbreeding with the Sith on the planet and essentially created this new kind of a order that they refer to as the Sith. And so this is how the Sith Empire was born. It was basically the Sith race interbreeding with the Jedi and essentially creating this kind of a mixture of a culture, a race, and a religion. And following many wars and many different conflicts, this is where they've created the Sith Academy, where then a lot of new generation of Sith would actually try to inherit this dark legacy by basically passing different birthright tests and trying to essentially become the most powerful Sith in the universe. But after many years, this planet essentially just became a very big tomb of different Sith lords that came back to this planet to have it as their final resting place. And so now this planet is essentially filled with various very dangerous creatures mixed with these spirits of the dark Sith. And one of the previous Sith Lords, Darth Plagueis, even talked about this planet as a graveyard for the darkest of Sith Lords, still whispering within their tombs. It shall always be a source of evil, spawning threats throughout the millennia. And in this particular game, in Star Wars The Old Republic, you actually get to experience this Acolyte training. Basically, this is the training you go through to try to become the Sith Master, or at least someone's apprentice. But ironically, for the Acolytes, for the trainees, the rule of two doesn't apply. You actually are not supposed to kill your brethren. You're actually even prohibited from trying to kill or betray other Acolytes on this particular planet. And it's actually punishable by death if you're caught trying to sabotage someone else's progress. But this doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. As a matter of fact, if you play this game, you'll find out that it happens quite a lot. Another interesting fact about this planet is that at some point Yoda actually came to this planet to try to meditate and find the meaning of life. It's actually a really interesting period of his life. And during this period, Darth Sidious and also another Sith by the name of Darth Tyrannus tried to break him and tried to basically turn him into a Sith. But he managed to pass these tests and actually became a much stronger Jedi at the end. And before we finish this video, let's briefly talk about some of the fauna and some of the animals and creatures that you can find on Korriban, because a lot of it has evolved to be super scary and super dangerous because of the dark influences of the Force. Now, one of these creatures called Teranishi is actually a Force-sensitive creature that is also super venomous. It's probably one of the more dangerous creatures that you can find on this planet. There's also another Force-sensitive creature called Tukata, and these are sort of like the dogs, I guess the dog version of this planet, except they're of course very evil. There are also very large bat-like creatures called Shirax that have super sharp teeth. There are also really strange looking lizards called Xyz, which were also Force sensitive and actually had something called dark side poison, which means that if they ever bit you, you would probably die unless you were Force sensitive yourself and could protect yourself from it. So essentially, a lot of these creatures are not only Force sensitive, but are actually really strong in the Dark Force and would usually cause a lot of suffering to their victim, or would actually be attracted to the suffering and would only attack someone who was actually suffering. And I think these creatures kind of give you an idea of what this world is like and what it's like to live on it. Hello dear viewer and welcome to What the Math. Today we're talking about Hoth, a planet from Star Wars universe, and we're going to try to recreate this planet pretty much from scratch in the Universe Sandbox 2. I've decided to actually do this a little bit different this time because, well, first of all, there isn't that much to say about planet Hoth. It's actually not particularly used in the Star Wars galaxy. It's only, it actually only appears about 3 times in the whole Star Wars extended universe as well. And so we're just going to actually just create it from scratch just to see if it's possible to create a realistic Hoth system. Now, first of all, we know that Hoth's star is actually a blue-white star. Now, I wasn't sure what the blue-white star means because it's not really well described in the books and in the comic books, but we know that it's not a massive star, because if it was a massive star, it would produce a lot of heat and Hoth would not be as cold as it is in real life. And of course, we're talking about the super cold planet that we get to see in Star Wars, the original trilogy, where the infamous ice battle takes place. Here's a picture from the battle, and I'm also going to show you footage from the recently released Star Wars Battlefront, where you actually get to play on this planet and experience it firsthand. It's probably one of the best recreations of this planet in any video games to date. Now, so Hoth, let's find out what we know about it. So first of all, we know that its year lasts for about 549 days, which is what I have right here, I believe. 1 year, and it's also, it has elliptical eccentric orbit, so its orbit should be more eccentric than normal. So this is a quite it has an eccentricity of 0.2. I think that's pretty eccentric, pretty elliptical. And the current year stands at, so let's switch to days, 549. Perfect. So that I got right. And the reason why we actually have to use a much smaller star. Okay, well, let's actually talk about the star. Now, it cannot be a main sequence orange star like our sun. It cannot be any other red star or any other star that has not a lot of heat, because in the books, like I said, it's referred to as the blue-white star. And for this to be a blue-white star, it actually has to most likely to be what we call a white dwarf. Basically, a star that has undergone its nova and released its outer shell and became a white dwarf. Now, the closest star that we know to us in real life is actually Sirius. This is what this star is based on. It's based on Sirius B. So here I'm going to show you what Sirius B looks like. And so this is Sirius B in comparison to my Hoth star. Basically, it has very similar mass to our sun, but its radius is about radius of our planet Earth. So it's much more compact, much more dense. It's about 6,000 kilometers in radius, as opposed to our sun, which is something like 700,000 kilometers. So it's about over 1,000 times smaller in size. Now, white dwarfs are, first of all, they're small. They have really long lifespans, but they don't produce enough heat. So, which is why that would explain why our Hoth system is much colder. Now, this is what I was going to show you in comparison. This is Rigel. Rigel is a typical blue-white star, or blue star in this case, and it's much more massive. But if I put it here, for our Hoth to have the same type of temperature as it does right now, it would have to be really, really far away. And so it's impossible for us to have a typical blue-white star and to have Hoth with a year of 500 something days. Otherwise, it's going to be too hot. So for this reason, we need to use a white dwarf. All right, so that's solved. Mystery number 2. So we have our orbit, we have our star, and now we have to make sure that we have right temperature. But before that, let's actually take a look at the size of the planet. Now, in the extended universe, it's described as a planet with about a radius of about 3,600 kilometers. Here, it's double that size. So we need to make it smaller. We need to make it much smaller, so we're going to shrink it. There we go, it shrunk. And here's the other thing. Well, first of all, we know that it's 1 day on this planet lasts for 23 hours. So we'll change that in motion. We'll make it rotational period 23 hours, and that's fine. That's not a big deal. But the big deal here is that we also know that its gravity is actually a little bit higher than that on Earth. Its gravity is 1.1 times the gravity on Earth, but in this case, it's only 25%. So that's not really going to add up, because this planet is much smaller. So how can it have higher gravity? Well, that's when materials come in handy. It's very likely that this planet contains some ridiculously heavy metals on the inside. Now, even if I make this entire planet just consist of iron, nothing else but iron, it will still not have the necessary surface gravity. Oh, actually, I need to change the size again. It shrunk a little bit. Here we go. Its surface gravity, even with just metal, is only 1.03 gravity of Earth. Whereas Hoth has higher than that. It actually has 1.1, which means that it's more likely that it's not just iron that it contains some really heavy metals on the inside, and that's very unusual for a planet. It has a very interesting composition. Obviously, we're not sure what it is, but it's very likely to be something more heavy than iron, which may suggest that that this system is actually one of the older systems in the Star Wars galaxy, because it contains some really, really heavy metals that are actually really difficult to create and only occur after a very massive supernova, and possibly even more than one supernova. So it's very likely that this is actually a pretty ancient, pretty old area of the Star Wars galaxy. So anyway, we have our size, we have our gravity. We now need to give it a little bit of water just to make it look more realistic. Now, we know that the surface here is about 30% covered in water, so we're gonna do just that, 30% water on the surface. Here we go. Let's make it a little bit less than that. This is a little bit more than we need, and somewhere around here. All right, perfect. So this is about 30% water. And the other thing we know about Hoth is that it also has 3 moons. So we're going to go into moons and just randomly slap 3 moons around it. So let's just put smaller moons. Now let's actually see what everything looks like from the moon number 3. So this is what it looks like if you're standing on the surface of moon 3 and you're looking into the sky and you see Hoth and the 2 other moons. Alright, so that's all pretty good so far. Now the other thing we know about the Hoth system is that Hoth is actually the last planet. It's planet number 6. So there's actually 5 more planets that are also uninhabited and also very desolate and very scary looking around the star called Hoth. So we're going to actually place 5 more random rocky planets that will be orbiting around this star, and we don't really know their names, so all of these names are randomly generated. And here we go. Let's see if their orbits are as they should be. Perfect. So Hoth is number 6. So that's what Hoth system looks like, except of course for the most important part that is actually shown to us in the movies. Now, what we know about Hoth is that on the outskirts, right after Hoth, it has a relatively large asteroid field that was, according to the books, formed because there were actually 2 other planets outside somewhere here that smacked into each other and created this asteroid belt. This asteroid belt has a name as well. It's actually, I believe it's called Hoth Asteroid Field. So we're actually going to do the following. We're going to first of all add an asteroid field right around Hoth, and here we go. So maybe a little bit too far, but that's okay. And we also are going to place just one little slightly larger asteroid so that we actually can name this afterwards. Somewhere around here, and let's name it Hoth Asteroid Field. And here we go. So here's our asteroid field. And this is actually what you see in the movie when Han Solo is escaping from this planet and he actually tries to escape the Galactic Imperial forces, and he hides somewhere inside the rock and then realizes that the rock is actually a very big worm. Or not the rock, but the actual cave inside the rock is a very big worm. And what's really interesting is that this asteroid field is mentioned a lot more than planet Hoth. As a matter of fact, this asteroid field is apparently famous for smuggling and for all kinds of illegal activities because it's so easy to hide there. So many smugglers, just like Han Solo, and this is actually where he knows this belt from his earlier days as a smuggler, that this is a place for illegal stuff to do, and this is where you can easily hide from any kind of Imperial activity as well. And so this is what the actual system looks like. Let's just enable orbit so we can see all of them. And here we go. Hoth is on the outskirts. It has 3 moons. Then there's 5 more planets. A star is in the middle. It's a blue-white star. And there's a Hoth asteroid field around them. So this is what it looks like, or it should look like in real life. And if actually one thing we forgot to see is if the temperature of Hoth... What's happening to my moons? My moons are acting funny. That's okay. The temperature of Hoth should be between -32 and -60 degrees Celsius. Now, surface pressure should not be that high. We're going to decrease it a little bit. Let's see if this is going to stabilize. If we take it to -60, it should stay at -60. And okay, it's going down a little bit. Can we go at -70? Perfect. -70. That's good enough. So the average temperature is -70, which is maybe a little bit colder than real Hoth. And we can change that by increasing the surface pressure a little bit. But this is what Hoth would be like in real life. So here you have really, really cold days, really, really cold nights. But it doesn't actually change that much. So it's sort of similar to Antarctica. It's anywhere between -32 and -60 degrees Celsius. And in real life, this planet is actually based on a real-life location in Norway. It's a small town called Finns, or Finnsey, I guess, in Norway. And you can actually go there and see some of these locations and some of these caves that we get to see in the movies. But what's really interesting is that there's actually quite a lot of discussions about Hoth and its feasibility from scientific perspective on different websites. For example, on space.com, there's a discussion about this planet that it would be impossible for this planet to have any life. Since it's so close to the asteroid field, the asteroids would constantly bombard this planet and would make it uninhabitable. Now, we're not sure if that's true or not, because maybe this field is a lot farther away than we think, so it's quite possible that it's not as often bombarded, and it's also possible that the 3 moons actually do protect it from various asteroid collisions. Another scientist from The Escapist actually mentioned that, well, on this planet we know there's 2 life forms. There are the Wampa, the predators, and there is the Tauntauns, the lizards that Luke Skywalker rides in the beginning of episode 5. And in order for these creatures to evolve, there has to be some sort of a plant that they have to basically eat. Specifically, the Tauntauns will have to survive on something. And we know that this planet also has something called lichen. Basically, it's a plant-like or a fungi-like life that is consumed by many other creatures on this planet. Now, the thing is, on our planet, we have lichen as well. And usually in the winter, it's eaten by different animals, and that's how many animals survive in the winter. But in the summer, lichen gets a chance to reproduce and to basically increase its numbers, and that's how it sustains itself. Now, here on this planet, it's always winter. So this particular person, I believe his name is CJ Miozi, mentioned that, well, it's impossible for these creatures to live then. If lichen doesn't get a chance to recreate itself or to reestablish its own numbers, what will happen to the fauna and all of the animals that actually consume lichen? And so there's got to be something else going on. So it's very possible that somewhere deep on the inside of this planet, there's quite a lot of different warm locations where lichen gets to basically reproduce, and then it kind of spreads throughout the rest of the planet. So it's possibly a very, very complex biosphere and a very, very complex life structure on this planet, because there's not just 2 species, there's actually quite a lot of species on this planet, and some of them are actually quite famous in the Star Wars universe, extended universe books. Specifically, one of the creatures is responsible for protecting something called Lumni Spice, and Lumni Spice is a very, very expensive spice that is only found on several planets in the Star Wars galaxies, and one of those planets is Hoth. And specifically here in the crevices along the equator, there's quite a lot of hidden spice that is actually mined by various adventure seekers, because apparently it's very, very dangerous to try to get it, and a lot of people would actually kill for this spice as well. But anyway, let's actually take a look at some of the surface features of this game by looking at the Star Wars Battlefront, the recently released game. This is actually a trailer. And so this is essentially what the game looks like and what the surface of this planet looks like. It's essentially a very cold, very wintry place. And what's interesting about this planet is that, like I mentioned before, it does have a very active ecosystem. So here we have plants that are being eaten by smaller animals, and smaller animals that are being eaten by larger animals, and on top of all of these animals is of course the infamous Wampa, which we get to see in one of the Star Wars movies when it tries to attack and eat Luke Skywalker. And if you're actually interested, apparently this Wampa that has its arm cut off by Luke Skywalker does survive, and as a matter of fact, in one of the extended universe books, Luke Skywalker actually meets this Wampa again, something like 12 years afterwards. So apparently it's still alive, still kicking around, and actually it is quite successful as well, because it ends up, I believe it ends up attacking and killing various hunters that try to hunt Wampas on this planet. And apparently hunting Tauntauns and hunting Wampas is actually a very popular sport on Hoth. And apparently in the extended universe, due to overhunting, the Tauntauns and the Wampa actually become endangered, and the Galactic Federation of Free Alliances passes the legislation basically protecting these creatures because they almost go extinct. And even though this planet is not very well known during Luke Skywalker time, it has actually been previously known in the Old Republic, and there were actually 2 really big battles here between the Jedi and the Sith, and many different ships and many different vessels that they used during this battle crashed on Hoth and are still somewhere there covered by all the snow, so nobody ever got to recover them. But following the Galactic Civil War that we get to see in the movies, and following the destruction of the AT-ATs that are destroyed by the rebels, there's actually many scavengers that do come to this planet to try to scavenge the scraps from these AT-ATs and sell them to various merchants, because obviously AT-ATs are state-of-the-art military technology at that time, and they cost quite a lot. And one thing that actually is not mentioned in the movies but is kind of interesting is that when the rebels found the base on this planet, it actually is there for only about a year. So within a year, the Empire actually is able to locate them using their intergalactic drones, and once they discover them, they basically launch the attack and destroy their base. And all of this happens about 3 years after the destruction of the first Death Star. Hello everyone and welcome to What the Math. In this video we're going to be talking about Alderaan, the planet that gets destroyed by the Death Star in the Star Wars The New Hope. Now we're going to be actually recreating this from scratch. As you can see, there's only one planet that I placed so far, and I'm not even sure if this is actually accurate in terms of distance and everything else. So we're going to start from scratch. We have our star Alderaan that's approximately very similar to our sun. It actually has same mass and same temperature. And let's actually recreate the entire solar system here and also talk a little bit about each planet and specifically about Alderaan as well. Now this particular solar system has 5 different planets orbiting around it, and the first planet is actually very close to the star. It's called Risa, and so here we're going to actually place the planet very similar to our Mercury, and it's going to be relatively close at a distance of only a few million kilometers away. And here we go, this is Risa, and it's essentially a molten world very close to the Alderaan star. And I can actually try to show you the orbit here. So here we go. It's very similar to Mercury. It's actually a lot hotter than Mercury because it is absolutely molten and super hot. And obviously Risa is an uninhabited planet. There's absolutely nothing that is built on it. There's no life, there are no creatures living here. So this planet is all by itself and all alone. And right after Risa we have Alderaan. This is the infamous Alderaan. This is essentially the planet where Leia Organa, or also known as Princess Leia, grows up because the senator from this planet adopts her early on. We actually get to see her adoption in episode 3 of Star Wars, where he takes her to this planet to hide her from the Empire and to raise her as his own daughter. So essentially Leia Organa, who becomes a royalty later on, is a sister of Luke Skywalker, and of course is also force sensitive, meaning that if she actually tried, she could possibly become a Jedi. But this is her homeworld, this is where she grew up, and this is the planet that she gets to see destroyed by the Death Star in Star Wars The New Hope. We're going to talk a little bit more about this planet when we actually get to explore its surface, but let's actually keep going. Now this planet has no moons, there's absolutely nothing here, but very close to it, just a little bit after it, planet number 3 is actually very similar to it. And this planet is called Delia. This is the 3rd planet in Alderaan system, and this planet was actually so close to Alderaan that you could actually see it from the sky of Alderaan. And so if we actually stand on the surface of Delia right now and look into the sky, we will most likely be able to see the planet Alderaan in its sky, and vice versa. We can actually see Delia from Alderaan as well. And there it is. You can kind of see it very rarely, I guess, but it is visible from this planet because it's relatively close to this particular planet. And this was actually known as the sister world of Alderaan, and essentially this is where a lot of the hard labor was outsourced from Alderaan, because Alderaan was the government planet of this particular system, whereas this was the worker planet of this system. And so here you could actually find a lot of different factories, a lot of different warehouses, and of course homes for various types of population of the system. And this planet was also a little bit smaller than Alderaan, so it was not as fancy and not as beautiful as Alderaan itself. The planet number 4 was called Avirandel. Now this planet was actually barren, and it was basically one big rock, and the lights that you see here are essentially just the tiny bits of population that was present on this planet. And this planet also had one moon, so we're going to place one random moon around it. Now we don't really know what the name of the moon was, but in this case it is going to be called Tacitus or Tacitus. And so this particular planet was planet number 4, and the only thing that was special about it was the fact that it did have that one moon flying or orbiting around it. And the last planet, planet number 5, was a little bit farther away. It was at least 2 astronomical units away. And this particular planet was called Avishan, and was also basically one big frozen world, kind of similar to our Pluto in a sense. It was one big ice ball and was very cold and uninhabited. And right after Avishan there was also an asteroid field. Now normally we wouldn't really mention the asteroid fields because they're quite common, but here this asteroid field was quite special. Let's actually place it first. We're going to use the Jupiter rings here and put it at a distance of approximately 5 to 6 astronomical units. It was probably much farther away, but we're going to put it just here for now. And let's add the ring. There we go. So this asteroid field that you see that has just formed had a bit of a special feature, and the feature was that this is where you could find something called Bondar. Bondar is a type of a lightsaber crystal that was used by the Jedi Knights to essentially make some certain types of their lightsabers, and specifically here it was the lightsabers that could actually stun people. If you've played Knights of the Old Republic, Bondar is one of the crystals that you can use to create a special stunning lightsaber, and this is the only place in the galaxy where you could actually find this type of a crystal. Now, before we actually land on the surface of Alderaan and talk a little bit more about the actual planet, let's pretend that this is where the Death Star arrives and decides to destroy the planet. Now, in the movies, Princess Leia Organa actually tries to plead for her planet and says that, you know, it's an unarmed planet, there's nothing on it, there's no danger on it, and she asks for Grand Moff to not destroy her planet. But unfortunately, he does not listen to her and does destroy it. Now, interestingly, what she says is actually not true. This was one of the most protected planets and it had quite a lot of weaponry on it. So had the Death Star approached it a little bit closer, it would actually may have been even destroyed. But luckily, the Death Star came from a farther distance and it actually did not endanger itself to various weaponry that was on Alderaan. Now, so we're going to try to destroy it, and the interesting thing here is that Mimas, which is the satellite of Saturn, which we're going to place orbiting around Alderaan right here, actually kind of, sort of, looks like the Death Star. I'm going to show you a picture. Let's see what it looks like here. Okay, it doesn't really resemble Death Star here at all, but this is the real picture of Mimas, and you can see it kind of resembles the Death Star a little bit. And so essentially, we're going to pretend that Mimas is basically going to be destroying Alderaan. So we're going to explode Alderaan using the exploder tool, assuming that this is how the Death Star destroyed this particular planet. So here we're going to go into power and we're going to click on explode and let's observe the fireworks. And boom. All right, so that was a little bit less impressive than I thought it would be. But essentially this is it. This is the end of Alderaan. And I'm kind of actually surprised that it wasn't a little bit more explosive. Maybe we can try this a little bit better. Let's actually go into view right here, and under simulation we can actually enable total fragmentation. Okay, this doesn't actually work, but this does. So total body fragmentation seems to work, and also let's see if we can enable all of them and see what happens. We're going to actually try to make a few more fragments when we explode this star or this planet one more time. So let's go into power again and let's try to explode it one more time. And nothing happens. All right, well, that's, you know what, that's fine. Let's just instead launch a few Mimases into it and pretend that this is essentially what destroyed this somewhat beautiful or previously beautiful planet. There we go. Massive destruction. So now this is a very bright and also somewhat uninhabited world, and essentially what happened to Alderaan after is that it actually disappeared, was completely destroyed by the Death Star, and when the Death Star's ray actually fired at the planet, some of its mass even escaped into the hyperspace and flew out of the system. But the resulting explosion produced a bit of a nova, which actually created a huge asteroid field, which we're going to create right now at a distance of approximately 1 astronomical unit, and here we go. So this is essentially the remnant of Alderaan. You can see it orbiting right in front of the Laia. We can actually kind of see what it looks like from the Laia, and there we go. So that's the remainder of the Alderaan system, and this is actually known as the Graveyard. So this asteroid field now in Star Wars Galaxy actually has a name, so this is known as the Graveyard. And what is special about the Graveyard is that this is where the survivor Alderaanians come to kind of worship their dead planet and also their dead relatives. And this ceremony has a name. It's actually called the Returning. There's also a few Alderaanians that play a role of guardians, which are basically people that protect the visiting Alderaanians that came for this type of ceremony, and these guardians have quite a lot of honor and quite a lot of support in Alderaanian society. As a matter of fact, they're actually held in very high regard amongst the Alderaanian exiles. But at the same time, Imperial forces always try to come here and try to capture some of the Alderaanians because many of them are actually rebels. Alright, so let's actually go and explore the surface a little bit, and this is of course before the destruction of Alderaan. But just before we finish with Universe Sandbox 2, just something that you need to know is that after the destruction of the Alderaan, the Alderanians, the survivors, the exiles, established a new colony called New Alderaan. So somewhere out there, there is another star called New Alderaan that has a planet called New Alderaan orbiting around it, and of course this planet is the new home of the Alderanian people. So anyway, let's go back to the old Alderaan before the destruction and walk on its surface and see what it actually looked like using the game code Star Wars The Old Republic. So let's take a look at this beautiful planet and walk around its surface and absorb its beauty. Now this planet is called Alderaan. This is the second planet in this solar system. And it's a planet that is known to be a home of many different heroes, including of course Leia Organa. Specifically, her name is actually Leia Organa Solo because she did marry Han Solo at some point. Now this is a very beautiful planet, it has a very refined culture, and it actually is committed to peace. This planet is also, or was also, famous for trying to maintain its natural beauty and trying to have as much care to protect nature as possible. In terms of size, this planet is very similar to Earth. It's approximately 12,500 kilometers in diameter and has very similar climates. So here we actually get to see the temperate climate that has a bit of a winter but also has trees and doesn't really look very cold, but it does have snow. Now originally this planet was actually inhabited by the species that you see on the screen. This was an insectoid, very intelligent species called the Kilix. But they actually referred to themselves as the kind. Now these particular species were known to have built very large mound-like structures on the planet, and actually you can still find some of them by playing various video games as well. And they ruled this planet without really fighting anyone until there was no more resources left for them, and then they moved to another planet called Alsakan, where they did the same thing. They actually used up all the resources and then finally departed for the deep space adventure and never returned ever again. So even though we don't really know much about them, we do get to see them in certain video games, specifically Knights of the Old Republic. The capital of this planet is called Eldera, and this particular capital is famous for its university that was built on a small island in the middle of the planet. But what you will see me visiting in this particular game is the so-called Organa Castle, which is basically the huge castle that was built by the Organa family long time ago. We're talking about thousands of years ago, before the planet was destroyed by the Death Star. Now, interestingly, in the movie, Leia actually claims that the planet is defenseless, but of course it's not true. This is a very powerful planet and has quite a lot of different defenses on its surface, like I mentioned before. And the destruction of this planet was actually felt by many force-sensitive people and creatures, including of course people on the Death Star. As a matter of fact, one of the guards on the Death Star actually fainted because he was a force-sensitive and he felt the scream of billions of people being silenced in an instant. But before the destruction, this planet was essentially a cultural center of this region. It was actually known for its wine, for its art, for various luxurious goods, and was also known as the Planet of Beauty. It was also interestingly voted to be the safest world in the galaxy by the intergalactic magazine called Hyperspace Traveler. And this was of course because most of the hard labor was outsourced to the third planet called Delia, where most of the factories and most of the warehouses were constructed. And of course, like I mentioned before, after the destruction, this became an asteroid field known as the Graveyard, and also became the ceremonial sort of a place where a lot of the Alderanians returned for the ceremony called the Returning, and were protected by the so-called guardians who would watch over them as they perform various rituals, like for example, shooting various capsules filled with gifts for their friends and families who died in the Death Star attack on this planet. And although many pirates tried to actually capture and steal some of these capsules, the Guardians always protected them and made sure that these capsules actually remained where they were as the memory to all of the people that died on the planet. Now that's really all I wanted to say about this beautiful planet, and of course if you actually want to explore more of it by yourselves, you can check it out in the game called The Knights of the Old Republic, or Star Wars The Old Republic, the game that I'm playing right now, where the game that's actually absolutely free. And at level 30, when you reach level 30, you can actually go to Alderaan and explore it, and even battle various Imperial forces, or specifically Sith forces, because this is actually an open PvP area where you can actually battle other players. Hello everyone, this is Anton and welcome to What the Math. Today we're going to be talking about Endor, the planet from the Return of Jedi, and we're going to be discussing, it's not a planet, it is a moon. There is a planet called Endor, but we're actually going to be talking about the moon of Endor that is in orbit around the star called Endor. Now, there's actually a bit of a controversy here, and we're going to talk about all of this, and we're going to try to recreate all of this using Universe Sandbox 2. But I think, first of all, I actually just wanted to show you where it is located in relation to other stars and other planets. So Endor is right here, and I'm just going to disable orbits and enable trails instead. We have Galactic Center right here. This is about 4,000 light years away from the Galactic Center. There's Coruscant right there, Bespin, Hoth. We also have Dagobah, Mustafar, and NABOO is right there. And so Endor is sort of in a region that is a little bit away from the regular travel routes. As a matter of fact, it's not a very well-traveled planet. Not many people, not many travelers stop here, mostly because, well, first of all, there's really nothing here. But second of all, it's actually because of the gas giant called Endor. The Endor gas giant, which we're going to be recreating in 1 second. This is not a complete system yet. The Endor gas giant is unfortunately so massive that it does disturb the travel pathways when it comes to interstellar travel, and because of its mass, it's actually very easy to miscalculate and possibly smack into the star or even fly somewhere where you didn't expect to fly. And so not many people visit this planet, and for this reason, Endor was chosen by the Galactic Empire as the place where they would build their second Death Star, because it was undisturbed and there was quite a lot of resources and materials in this particular system. So let's actually go into a completely new simulation here. And that is because I wanted to talk about two different things. One is the canon, Star Wars canon, and one is the extended universe of the Star Wars universe. Now, in the extended universe, this is what the system looked like. This is actually from the extended universe that was actually still accepted up until mid-2014. After 2014, unfortunately, the new direction, the new Star Wars, I guess you could call it management, and here we're talking about the people that basically are making Star Wars episodes 7, 8, and 9, decided they're not going to honor the extended universe anymore, and they basically said it doesn't actually count anymore. It's not part of the Star Wars universe anymore. And so here, and specifically in not in canon, in extended universe, the star was actually called Ibleam. Ibleam. Very interesting name. And Endor was the name of the gas giant that was the closest to the star. There is Endor. Endor had 9 moons, and most of the moons we don't really know the names of, but we do know 2 of them. One of them was called the Forest Moon of Endor. That's it right here. This was the only habitable location in the entire system, and this is where Ewoks live. This is where many other sentient beings live. And here we're talking about species like Duloks, Yuzum, and there's actually quite a lot of various species that ended up on this planet because they either got lost and crashed here and had to survive on it, or because it was just a very nice world to live on. It had forests. It had very beautiful lakes. Actually, this is too much water. It's supposed to have only about 8% water on its surface. I'm going to reduce that a little bit. It should be about 8% only. So compared to Earth that has something like 73%, here it's only 8%. And basically, most of this planet was very large forests, and these forests consisted of really large red trees that we get to see in the movies, and I'm going to show you near the end of the video what it looked like and how it was recreated in Star Wars Battlefront. But here, yeah, we have these this beautiful planet that was inhabited by many species, and specifically Ewoks. And then there was another moon that we knew about, and this is actually what Ewoks worshipped. This was the sister moon of Endor. And unfortunately, Sister Moon, even though Ewoks thought had life on it, didn't really have anything. It was a very empty moon filled with nothing. The rest of the moons, we don't really know what their names are, so these are all randomly generated. And this one actually looks kind of cool. Let's actually zoom into it. So it's all randomly generated by the game itself. And so 9 moons in total, and this was around the gas giant called Endor. And after Endor, there were actually 3 more planets, and here we had a planet called Elogi, or is that Elogai? I think it's Elogi. And this planet, and actually all of the other planets in the system were also bare. There was nothing on them. They were completely empty, devoid of life, but full of resources, which is why the Galactic Empire, this planet is called Megiddo, which is why the Galactic Empire chose this particular location as the location to build their second Death Star. The last planet here is called Dor. Now, we're going to add the Death Star, and to do this, we're going to go zoom in here, zoom in on the forest moon of Endor, which is right here, and we're going to build the Death Star. If you still don't know how to do that in Universe Sandbox 2, what you do is you go into here and you type Mimas. Now, Mimas in real life actually does look like the Death Star. Here's a picture of Mimas, and we're going to just make it orbit around forest moon of Endor. There you go. There's our Mimas. And so yeah, so this was where the Death Star was built. Unfortunately, here it doesn't actually look like that, but maybe one day they'll actually improve this and make it look more realistic. And so as the Death Star was orbiting around the planet, on the surface there was a shield generator that would actually protect the Death Star, and this is where the Emperor Palpatine wanted to lure the rebels. He actually specifically leaked the plans for this Death Star number 2, which is actually should be called Death Star number 2. And here you go. And so he leaked the plans to the rebels because he wanted to lure them into this location and then destroy them with one sudden strike, which he almost succeeded, except that he didn't realize that Ewoks, the little Ewoks, little furry creatures, were a lot more influential than anyone imagined. So they ended up actually defeating the elite forces from the Empire. Many people don't really realize or don't understand how exactly that happened, but it happened. So Han Solo, Leia Organa, and of course the Chewbacca, and of course the Ewok forces, technically controlled by 3CPO, who they thought was their god and their deity, would actually defeat the forces on the ground and destroy the shield generator, which of course allowed the rebels to destroy the Death Star. And here this was a force co-led, and I guess led in a sense, by Lando Calrissian, who basically jumped into the system and managed to destroy most of the Imperial forces around this region. Now, what happened afterwards, and this is actually where I guess you do get this information from the extended universe, but basically the debris from this particular destroyed Death Star, and let's actually see if we can just explode it. We're gonna click on explode button and boom, there you go. So debris from the Death Star and also the debris from all of the other spaceships in the vicinity basically created a kind of almost like a ring around the forest moon of Endor that would just orbit around it for eons afterwards. There was one comic book that tried to mention that possibly a lot of the debris actually landed on the planet and destroyed the ecosystem on the planet, but then it was also proven completely incorrect in one of the other following comic books, that it was actually just a myth and not true. But here we go, we are creating this beautiful debris ring that will start orbiting the forest moon of Endor. So don't forget, this is all from the extended universe. This is not canon anymore, and is very likely not to be true in the future Star Wars movies either. So it's very likely that if we do see Endor or the forest moon of Endor, we'll see something completely different. But let's just wait for this ring to be finished, because I would like to see what it looks like, or basically what it would look like if this was actually still true. And I guess here you go, the ring has been completed. Death Star is still orbiting there too, but that's okay. We don't really care about it as much because it's been destroyed by the rebels. And the ring is actually slowly disappearing. I'm not sure why, but I guess that's just part of the game. And so yeah, so this is what it would look like with the ring orbiting around the forest moon of Endor. And this is essentially how the system would look if it was still or if the legends, as they're called, if the extended universe material is still accepted. Now, unfortunately, it's not really accepted, so we have to recreate all of this again. So we're going to click on the new here, and let me show you what is accepted in the canon. So this is what we know about Endor systems so far. First of all, we know that it is actually accepted to be a binary system. It's a binary star. There's Endor 1, which is the name of the first star, and Endor 2, a smaller star orbiting basically around the barycenter that's somewhere right here, which is essentially how this system looks in the accepted canon that is going to be present in the future Star Wars. So the other thing that we know, and basically that's really the only other piece of information, is that yes, there is a gas giant, and it's called Endor as well. And we don't really know if there's any other planets. We don't really know if there's any other moons around that gas giant. We only know that it has the forest moon of Endor orbiting around it. So that's pretty much it for the actual canon, for the Star Wars canon that is accepted by I guess J.J. Abrams and Disney. And so what we have to do here is we need to place a gas giant, and let's just create a random gas giant around these two stars. We're going to place them a little bit farther away, and here's where the problem is going to be. In my experience with the universe Unbox 2, and just in general understanding how orbital dynamics work, it is very, very difficult for a planet to orbit two binary stars. As a matter of fact, there's only like 3 planets we've discovered out there in our galaxy that possibly have this orbit. Now, this is actually called P-type orbit, and P-type orbits are basically almost impossible to reproduce, and I'm going to try my best to just place it at the right moment so I can possibly make it orbit, but let's see. We may need to balance motion here, and around here we go. Let's actually change its mass to about 0.9 masses of Jupiter. Now, I don't know if this is going to... Ooh, this is too much. I don't know if it's going to stay in this particular orbit, but chances are it's not. And you'll see that its orbit is just going to be very unpredictable. Now, P orbits are theoretically almost impossible to create. And for them to occur naturally is very, 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 very unlikely. Although, obviously, nothing is impossible. The other orbits in binary system are the ones I've recreated before, and they're actually called S orbits, S-type orbits. That's when there is a binary star system, but what happens here is that the object only orbits one of the stars, and that's actually quite easy to recreate. It's not mathematically impossible. It's actually quite possible, quite feasible, and does happen quite a lot out there. Specifically, our closest neighbor, Alpha Centauri, does have not binary, but actually triple system, and it's very likely that it does have objects flying or orbiting around each one of those stars, each one of the 3 stars. So S-type orbits are not very unusual, but P-type orbits are just difficult. And if I were to accelerate time here, you would notice that at some point the orbit here would become too unstable, and eventually this object would actually escape into the outer solar system, just because it's just the barycenter there is not very difficult to orbit around, and because of the constant motion of these 2 stars, they do kind of slowly push this object into the outer solar system. But anyway, let's just, because we have at least a few years before that happens, we're going to add the Endor moon, or the forest moon of Endor, and here we go. It doesn't look the same, I guess. It does have a little bit less water than I wanted to have, so let's add a little bit more water. And it's not as green, unfortunately, but that's because this was also randomly generated. So this is the forest moon of Endor. Temperature-wise, it's about this as it should be, and it's basically orbiting around Endor, which is a gas giant. This is Endor, the gas giant, and this by itself orbits around the binary star called Endor 1 and Endor 2. Now, this type of orbit actually has a name in astronomy, and this is called circumbinary planetary orbit, and circumbinary refers to the fact that there's 2 stars, and by itself this is actually a very, very challenging topic mathematically to figure out, and it's actually, ooh, what's happened to my Ender? No, it's actually, for some reason, it's coming closer to the stars, and I think this is when it's possibly a limitation of the game, or actually a limitation of the idea of binary navigation. It's just really difficult to place a star, a planet, or any other object orbiting around a binary star system that has two stars orbiting relatively quickly. And once again, this is actually called a p-type orbit. And you can kind of notice that its orbit is actually constantly changing. It's kind of wiggling around because of the motion of those two stars. So unless the second star is actually significantly smaller and doesn't really affect the orbits of other planets orbiting around the system, it would actually most likely not have any bodies orbiting around it. So, which is why I personally think that it was a really bad idea for them to include a binary star and to basically completely erase the extended universe ideas, because there was some really cool stuff going on in the Ibleum system, that was the previous name of the Endor system, and of course removing all of those legends about the sister moon that Ewoks actually respected quite a lot, and a lot of other things, including some of the creatures that would be actually absolutely amazing to see one day in one of the future Star Wars video games or Star Wars movies. Well, anyway, so that's pretty much it for Universe Sandbox 2, and I just wanted to show you what the surface of this planet looks like in Star Wars The Battlefront, the game that was released last year. Here, while you basically watching this kind of a cool scene, I just wanted to briefly mention some of the other cool things from the Legends, not the canon. And one of them was actually that there used to be people coming to the moon of Endor, and for a very, very funny, unusual, interesting reason. And this reason was because Ewoks, yes, Ewoks, the hairy people that destroyed helped destroy the shield generator, were also famous or popular in the world, in the off-world trade, because of their jerky, Ewok jerky. Now, we're talking about jerky made out of Ewoks. Yes, people would actually hunt Ewoks and turn them into beef jerky, or I guess Ewok jerky, which was a popular snack in the outer rim of the Star Wars galaxy. I know it sounds strange, I know it sounds kind of gross even, but yes, some people would actually eat them, and despite them being sentient beings, they were actually quite popular in the outer rim worlds, and many people did eat them. And the other interesting fact about this particular planet, or I guess what happened around the planet, after the destruction of the second Death Star, when the Emperor Palpatine actually perished, in the extended universe, he didn't die. He actually was able to use a very ancient Force technique to send out his spirit to a planet called Biss, where he actually had a hidden temple and a hidden Imperial fortress where he had extra clones, which he then inhabited and actually used to continuously control the Empire. And one day he actually was planning to inhabit a body of one of the Skywalker family. And here, this was actually in one of the comic books, he tried to inhabit the body of Anakin Solo, the third son of Han Solo and Leia Organa. And he would technically actually be the brother of Kylo Ren that we get to see in the 7th Star Wars episode. But anyway, so when Anakin Solo was still a baby, Emperor Palpatine, that was at this point inhabiting the body of a clone, actually tried to approach the baby, and because nobody really knew who he was, he actually tried to, in a sense, possess the baby with his own spirit and essentially become even more powerful, because he would have all of the Force powers from the Skywalker family, and at the same time would also be able to bring his own knowledge as well. But fortunately for him, Han Solo actually did shoot the clone, and as he actually still tried to inhabit the baby, his spirit was captured by another Jedi Knight and then taken into the abyss of the Force, where he was trapped for eternity. So this was actually a pretty awesome story in the extended universe that is now technically erased from existence. And so I think, according to the canon, Emperor Palpatine died with the second Death Star, and this is of course because Darth Vader threw him into the power generator, where he actually just exploded. Now, anyway, so that's it. That's all I wanted to mention about Endor and about some of the stories and history behind it, and also the two different versions of Endor that were that are available to us, and here we're talking about the canon and the legends. And personally, I kind of like the legends Endor a lot better because it does have a lot of history behind it, whereas the new canon Endor does feel a little bit empty, and the fact that it has 2 binary stars and the planet Endor, specifically the gas giant Endor orbits around them, does make it very difficult to recreate in real life. Hello everyone and welcome to What the Math. This is Anton, and today we're talking about Bespin, the only gas giant we're probably going to talk about in this series, because this is the only gas giant that is actually mentioned in the movies. We get to see it in the movies, and we actually get to experience some of the coolest storyline parts that I've described in the introduction. Basically, this is where we find out that, yes, Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father. He also loses his arm. Han Solo gets betrayed and frozen in carbonite. And all of this happens on this really unusual gas giant, and specifically in an area called Cloud City that is essentially orbiting around this planet in its atmosphere. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to actually recreate this from scratch. I'm going to show you what the actual solar system looks like here. We'll also talk a little bit more about the specifics about, the Cloud City. We'll talk about the industry that goes on here, and so on and so forth. So let's start by basically going into the orbits here. I just want to see if this is working for us. And alright, so the orbits are showing, but my orbit is unfortunately a little bit too short. So I'm going to remove these moons for a second, because otherwise they're just going to fly away from us. We're going to recreate them later. And let's take Bespin. And actually, the reason I want to keep this particular gas giant is because Bespin is technically red-ish. And it's kind of, it's basically an unusually lucky thing that as soon as I created this particular gas giant, it turned out to be red. And it's also not very large. So here it's only about 7 times size of Earth. And in Star Wars universe, as I've read more about this gas giant, I realized that because of the size of its moons, it's probably not very large. So its moons are actually really, really small in comparison to Jupiter and Saturn, at least. So we're going to go in here and change the orbital parameters. Specifically, we're going to go into the part that says orbital period right here, and we're going to change this to almost 12 years. So let's just say 12 years here, because that's how long it takes for Bespin to planet Bespin to orbit around star called Bespin, and this is the star called Bespin right there. However, its rotational period is actually a lot faster than this. As a matter of fact, it takes it about half a day, half a real life day, to rotate. So it's about 12 hours days on Bespin, which means that you'll get to actually witness sunlight and darkness within the same day as it would be on Earth. You may have noticed already that many stars and important planets in Star Wars Galaxy and Star Wars Universe usually have the same names, so this is the case here as well. Both the star and the main planet that we're interested in have the same name. But this is not the only planet here. As a matter of fact, there are more planets, and we're going to place them right now. We're going to zoom in on Bespin, and we're going to place a randomly generated rocky star relatively close to Bespin, because that's really where it is located. And this first planet is called Miser, or Miser? I think it's Miser. And Miser is basically a very, 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 very hot planet. It's not hot yet because I've just placed it. Actually, it should be hotter than this, so let's place it a little bit closer. Alright, so I think this is a little bit closer to reality. It was almost 500 degrees Celsius on the surface, pointed toward the star, and a little bit cooler on the other side. And this planet Miser is important because this is where most of the metal that was used in the construction of the Cloud City came from. As a matter of fact, this is a mining colony, or basically it was a mining colony where, because this is an iron-rich world filled with different metals, much of the materials in the construction of the other things in the solar system came from here, from this really scary looking, really, really hot, but somewhat beautiful and somewhat unusual planet called Miser. There's also another planet. This is planet number 2, a little bit farther away, and this planet is a volcanic world called Orin. Now, this is a very unusual planet because First of all, it actually has a very eccentric orbit. I'm going to show you how eccentric it is. So it has a very sort of close periapsis to the star and very far apoapsis. And the other thing about this planet is that twice a year it actually passes through the asteroid belt located somewhere in this region. We're going to actually build that right now. We're going to make an asteroid belt that this planet is going to pass through. And so here is that belt, and it does have a name, and this particular belt is called the Velser's Ring. And Velser's Ring is basically, it was supposed to become a gas giant, but it didn't really become one because of the interaction with other planets. And twice a year, Orin goes through this belt and very likely experiences some collisions with asteroids and possibly gets bombarded by smaller particles as well. But this ring is also used for mining, so a lot of the materials that are used on Bespin in the Cloud City are actually, they come from here. They're actually mined in this region. And so if we actually accelerate this a little bit, we'll hopefully get to see how it passes through this ring, and we might even experience a collision or two. Now, Orin is actually a much hotter world than Miser. As a matter of fact, the atmosphere of Orin is filled with volcanic eruptions and ash and soot, so here nothing would actually survive on its surface because it is a pretty scary, pretty dangerous world. And here we go with the passage through the asteroid field. Let's see if actually something does happen. We might experience a collision, although it's kind of unlikely because I didn't really place that many asteroids. And even in real world, if we were to pass through the asteroid belt, our planet would not really experience collisions because of the distances between the asteroids. The asteroids are actually a lot farther away than the movies make us believe. And as you can see, it just passed through the belt with no collisions at all. And this is actually quite likely that what would actually happen. It would disturb other asteroids, and maybe some of them would actually instead collide with other planets, including Bespin. But here we didn't really experience anything, and that's the reality. And now let's actually talk about Bespin itself, so the beautiful gas giant of Bespin. Now, first of all, it did have moons. We don't really know how many exactly, but there is at least 2 of them that are named, and we're going to place them right now. And these 2 moons are right here. You can see them orbiting around Bespin. They were called Drudona and Hagard. These were also known as the twins, and for some reason their orbit is changing, but I think it's because they're getting wobbly interacting with some other things in this particular galaxy I've created. Anyway, so yes, these 2 were very small. Hagard was only about 5 kilometers in diameter, and Drudona was about 2.5 kilometers in diameter. So they were really tiny, and it would be really difficult to see them from Cloud City because of the thickness of atmosphere and because their size was very, very, very tiny. And both of these were covered in ice, and specifically Hagard, the one that is on the outside here, was actually covered in green ice. So this right here was all green ice. Unfortunately, we can't really recreate this in Universe Sandbox 2, but imagine it was actually green. And the gas giant of Bespin itself was basically a mining colony where they were mining something called Tibanna gas. Now, Tibanna gas is a type of a gas that was used in certain weaponry to basically turn the explosion inside your blaster into a laser. And specifically, this gas would make it something like 4 times more powerful than usual. So it was highly sought out after by various parties, including obviously the Empire and the Rebel Alliance. And Tibanna gas is produced by creatures that are actually, they live on this planet, they live in the atmosphere of this planet. They're a type of floaters that basically live in the upper atmospheres. Unfortunately, we can't really see them here, but they would basically float through the upper atmosphere and produce this gas. And I think one of the creatures that produced them was called a Beldon, which was a very, very large floating creature that would basically move around the atmosphere area and would belch out or excrete this gas that was then harvested by various species on that basically lived in the upper atmosphere. Now, this is actually the interesting part. What we get to see in the movie is the region of the atmosphere right between the very toxic lower region and very thin upper region that was referred to as Bespin life zone. This was actually the only area of a gas giant that was had a good enough pressure, good enough atmosphere, and basically everything was just perfect for life to survive. But if you were to move a little bit lower, you would actually reach really toxic area. If you were to go a little bit higher, you would reach the very thin atmosphere where nothing would really survive. And this is, of course, very similar to other gas giants and other planets that we have in our universe as well. If we were to look at, for example, Jupiter, let's actually just place Jupiter here in the distance and take a look at this really quickly as well. So this is our Jupiter, and Jupiter is also a gas giant, and somewhere in the atmosphere of Jupiter there's a region of space where the pressure is just right for us to survive. Now, it may not have oxygen and it may not have other gases that we need to survive, but it would have enough pressure for us to actually just go outside, as long as we're on some sort of floating colony thingy that flies through its upper atmosphere and floats above the rest of Jupiter, and we could actually live there using oxygen masks and nothing else really, as long as the temperature there is also relatively good. Now, we don't actually know what the temperature on Jupiter is. It's very likely to be very, very cold, possibly in something along this minus 60, minus 70 degrees Celsius. But on Bespin, the temperature was just right. So Bespin was not far enough from its star, and also experienced quite a lot of other favorable conditions that made the temperature and the pressure in those particular life zone regions to be just perfect. And because of this, there were actually many different species of animals that floated through the atmosphere. Some of them were called Tibonooks, some of them were called Velkers, there were also something called rocks. And all of these species actually evolved and lived in that region of upper atmosphere. And what's really interesting is that most of the things on this particular gas giant, specifically its color and the fact that we have this gas that can be mined on this gas giant, all of these things are actually produced by life on it. So for example, the pinkish color is because of the algae in the atmosphere of this planet. And the gas, as I mentioned, was produced by something called Beldens. And this by itself makes this a very unique, very kind of an interesting gas giant and planet in general, because this is essentially a planet that is completely modified and changed in a sense by the life in its upper atmosphere. Now, whether we actually have this type of life on other planets in our solar system is still a mystery. We will not really know for many, many years until we go there and try to get into the atmosphere and explore it a little bit more. But there were various theories, including theory of possibly creating this kind of a floating colony on Venus, which also has very high pressure and temperature on the bottom, but has this kind of a area in its upper atmosphere where we could actually easily survive as well. And so this, in a sense, makes Bespin a pretty unique and pretty awesome world to explore in Star Wars Galaxy. And I really hope one day we'll get to actually experience this in one of the video games, where we'll get to actually visit this beautiful planet and possibly even fly through its atmosphere and do some crazy things like fight the Empire in an X-Wing flying through the Cloud City. Although I'm pretty sure there is probably already a game that has done this, I just can't really think of it right now. If you do know of any really cool games in Star Wars universe that does have a battle above the skies of Bespin, please let me know, because it would be really fun to explore a Cloud City battle in the sky of Bespin. And anyway, so I think that's all I wanted to mention about Bespin and about this particular system. The rest we actually know from the movies. We know that Lando Calrissian was the governor of Cloud City, and then after the betrayal of Han Solo, I guess he felt really bad, and so he joined the Rebel Alliance and eventually became the general of the Rebel Alliance that we'll get to actually talk about more in the future videos. And then he, of course, participated in the Battle of Endor and destroyed a second Death Star, about which I talked in my previous video that you can find in the playlist. Anyway, so that's it for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and hopefully you learned a little bit more about Bespin Star, Bespin Gas Giant, and Bespin System in general. I'm going to show you the location of Bespin one more time, so you get to compare it to the rest of the stars in the Star Wars universe. So we have Endor, that's right here. We have Dagobah, we have NABOO, and in the center there is TYTHON, CORUSCANT, and this is where the black hole is. And welcome back to another episode of Recreating Star Wars in Universe Sandbox 2. Now, today we're going to be talking about a system that not many people actually know because it is technically from the extended universe, but because this has also been recreated in various video games, it's very likely that it's going to become canon. And the system I'm talking about is called Dromund. Or is it Dromund? No, I'm pretty sure it's Dromund. Anyway, so what is Dromund? And specifically here, we're talking about a planet called Dromund Kaas. Well, this is actually one of the most important systems and planets in the Sith history. As a matter of fact, it has actually been the seat of a Sith Empire for many thousands of years. But unfortunately, in the time of the Star Wars movies, and here we're talking about the original trilogy and the trilogy afterwards and the trilogy that's coming up, in the Star Wars movies, this system has actually been kind of lost to time, essentially, and it is a system that is technically still inhabited by the Sith, but is not really as important anymore. But so let's actually try to find it. Where is it? So where is that lost system? So I haven't looked at the various maps I've discovered, and this is actually from Star Wars The Old Republic as well. I've discovered that it's actually a little bit to the side of Korriban, right here. So it's actually, we're going to make it from scratch. We're going to place a completely new star right here, and it's going to be a sun-like star because it is actually a sun-like star. And just a few light years away from Korriban, right about here, is our star called Dromund. And this is actually in the region of space called the Sith World. This is where Korriban is as well. And we've already talked about Korriban in one of the previous videos. So if you want to see, or if you want to learn more about the Sith, check out the Korriban video as well. And so here is Dromund, and it's orbiting around the central black hole in the center of the galaxy. Now, alright, so this is our star, and it's very sun-like. And it actually has 5 different planets orbiting around it. We don't really know much about 4 of them, but one of them is very important. And let's start with the first planet orbiting close to this star, and this is a planet that we're going to randomly generate as a random rocky planet. This is a planet called Dromund Ixen. And let's actually zoom in on Dromund Ixen just to see what it looks like. So this is an uninhabited planet. It's basically too close to the star to have any life on it. And it's obviously really, really hot and very, very, very unhospitable to any kind of life on this planet. So, alright, so this is the first planet, and it's going to be orbiting very close to Dromund. And the second planet here is actually a gas giant. So this is actually very surprising. So yes, there is a gas giant in this system. It's a little bit after Dromund Ixen. And I'm creating a random gas giant right here. This gas giant has a name of Dromund Kalakar, and let's actually zoom in on it just to see what it looks like. So it's actually sort of in a location where Venus would be for us, and has 6 different moons orbiting around it. So we're going to generate 6 random moons orbiting around Dromund Kalakar. And interestingly, well, actually one of them has a name, and the name of the 6th one is called Kalakar 6, which actually implies that the other 5 are called by numbers as well. And there we go. So we have 6 different moons. Now, the 6th one is actually kind of important, at least in the extended universe, and this is actually because there's a book that talks about how at some point there was a cult here that worshipped the dark side, but it wasn't really the Sith, and they actually tricked Darth Vader to come to this planet, and they try to basically destroy him by using a recreation of Darth Maul from Star Wars Episode 1. And so the recreation, or I guess the clone of Darth Maul, tried to defeat Darth Vader and almost succeeded. And the idea here was to basically try to re-establish Darth Maul as the main apprentice of Darth Sidious. And so this cult was basically worshipping Darth Maul, but unfortunately the Darth Maul clone lost, and following this, Darth Vader returned back to the Sith Empire, and Darth Sidious came back to this particular moon and basically punished the cult by destroying them. And so it's a pretty interesting story, but I'm not sure if it's actually going to be part of canon anymore, as Extended Universe has officially or unofficially been kind of cancelled out. But it's a pretty awesome sub-story or a side story that I think would be nice keeping in this particular system. So this is planet number 2, and planet number 3 is, of course, Dromund Kaas. Now this is actually one of the most, if not the most important planets for the Sith Empire, and essentially is the seat of their empire. This is where the Emperor used to live. And in games like the Old Republic games, you actually get to first hear about it, but in the Star Wars The Old Republic, the free MMORPG that you can actually try by yourself, you get to visit this planet, and at the end of this video, I'll actually give you some sights from Dromund Kaas, because it's actually a pretty awesome world. So what we know about this is that it's a tropical world, it's a very dangerous and scary world filled with all kinds of scary creatures, and temperature here is a little bit higher than it would be on Earth. And this is what our tropical world is going to look like, and it actually surprisingly does have a purpley bluish sky, and I was actually very lucky to create a planet that had very purpley bluish skies as well. And you'll get to see what the surface actually looks like from Star Wars The Old Republic when we get to the end of the video. And so this planet for thousands of years actually had quite a lot of Sith living on it, and is essentially very sort of a dark force kind of a planet, where it's known to actually host a lot of dark force or dark side powers on it. So this is actually where you would want to go if you wanted to become the darkest of the Sith. Now it does have two moons around it. We're going to randomly generate random 2 moons. I'm not sure what their names are, unfortunately, but oh no, this is not good. It actually is orbiting a little bit too close to the planet. Let's make it a little bit farther away. There we go. So 2 moons around it. One is called Eris and one is called Asima, but these are randomly generated names because I actually could not, unfortunately, find out what their names really are. Now, because this planet is a little bit closer to the star than Earth is, it's obviously a little bit warmer. And here, the interesting thing about it is that because of the dark forces within the planet, the dark side forces, for some unknown reason, the atmosphere of this planet is always shrouded in storms, and there's a lot of lightning on the surface. And you can actually feel the dark side if you ever visit this planet in Star Wars The Old Republic. But we'll explore more of this planet when we get to the Star Wars The Old Republic near the end of the video. Now we have another planet here, and this is planet number 4. And this is actually kind of similar to our own Mars. And so this is another arid planet that is uninhabited and has 1 moon orbiting around it. And the planet is called Dromund Fels, with a little moon orbiting around it called Ursu. This is a randomly generated name, as I don't really know the real name of this moon. So planet number 4, and the last planet, planet number 5, was called Dromund Tyne. And Dromund Tyne was also uninhabited and was a relatively cold, relatively dark place because it was relatively far from the star. And so that's essentially the 5 planets of Dromund system, and here you get to see them with their orbits as well. The most important planet is obviously Dromund Kaas, and Dromund Kaas is hopefully a planet that will not disappear from the Star Wars universe, because it is actually a really cool world, especially if you get to visit it in Star Wars The Old Republic. And around this planet, the Sith Emperor actually used to have a personal space station where he would actually reside on, and originally, this particular planet and this entire system was actually discovered by the Sith Empire something like 7,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. And another really interesting thing about this particular planet and the region of space is that it's actually located very close to a reddish-brown nebula called the Stygian Caldera. And because this nebula is visible from the planet and from this star system, it actually gives this entire system a kind of a brownish, reddish color, which kind of adds to the fact that this is a dark side planet and a dark side system, and this is where the Sith Empire resides. Anyway, so let's actually take a look at this planet from its surface using Star Wars The Old Republic and talk a little bit more about it.
Welcome to Dromund Kaas, where freedom goes to die, and legends are forced on the galaxy.
So we are now in Star Wars The Old Republic, where you actually get to explore this planet in quite a lot of detail, and you get to visit some really cool places, including the Imperial Palace and Dromund, not Dromund, but Kaas City, which is actually the main city on this planet, and it actually is a pretty cool location to visit. So as I basically run through the planet and show you some of the local life and also battle some of the local criminals, let's actually just look around the area, and I'm going to also talk a little bit about the history of the Sith Empire and just why this planet is so important. So this planet was officially discovered by the Sith Empire, and it was actually conquered by a Sith Lord called Tulak Horde, and he conquered the Drummond system, where he actually performed a ritual of Sith magic which turned the system a little bit different. So it was actually, or it looked different before he actually performed the Sith magic on the entire system. And that, of course, is to show you how powerful he was. However, this particular planet and actually the entire system was eventually lost to history because of something called Great Hyperspace War. But then this system was rediscovered, and actually not once but at least twice, and the remains of the shattered Sith civilization actually were restored just to be lost again later on. And eventually the Sith obviously settled on Korriban, but before Korriban, this is actually where their main seat of power was. And after about 2,000 years, and this was in year 2000 before the Battle of Yavin, this system was finally abandoned once again, and only the remains of Dark Force followers actually stayed here. And like I mentioned before, one of those followers were the so-called cult that tried to trick Darth Vader, and this cult was called Prophets of the Dark Side. And so they actually stayed here for thousands of years, trying to basically recreate the Sith Empire the way they actually thought it should be. And later on, this particular planet became almost like a myth. As a matter of fact, many people thought that this is not a real planet, not a real system, and many of them actually thought that this was just a mythical or a legendary representation of the Sith Empire, but Master Yoda actually confirmed the existence of the system during the Clone Wars. And later on, during the Clone Wars, there was even a battle here between the Republic and the Confederacy of Independent Systems. But unfortunately, since a lot of this information is actually part of the extended universe, it may no longer really apply to this amazing, beautiful system, and may actually just disappear into the annals of Star Wars mythology. But without really spoiling too much, all I wanted to do here is just to show you some of the views that this planet had to offer, and actually invite you to explore this by yourself. Star Wars The Old Republic is a free-to-play game, and you can definitely get to, I think it's actually a level 10 that you have to get to, and this would probably take you a few hours before you actually are required to visit this planet, because this is one of your main quests. It takes you here, and this is where the very evil Darth Plagueis resides, and actually a few other evil characters are all present on this planet, and there's quite a lot of really cool missions and a lot of really cool locales you get to visit as well. Hello everyone, this is Anton and welcome back to What the Math. This is episode 11. Today we're going to be talking about the Hutts. This is a star called YouTube. That's right, it's a star called YouTube. Welcome to YouTube, everyone. And this star is essentially where Hutts have made their new home thousands of years before the Battle of Yavin. Now, this is a yellow star that has some of the most important, most influential planets in the Hutt space, and essentially this is where the Hutts have moved after their original planet called Varl was actually destroyed by them. They actually destroyed it to the point where they were no longer able to survive on it, and this is kind of what happened on their new world as well. So we're going to start creating this in Universe Sandbox 2, and we're going to start with the innermost planet first, and this planet is called Essium. It's a molten world that's very, very close to the star called YouTube. And so here is Essium, a very, very hot, very molten world that is one of the few planets in the system that doesn't actually have anything important and doesn't have any life on it, and neither does it have any moons. So there's really nothing else to say about this planet other than it's the closest to the star. The second planet from YouTube is called Nalkoska. Now, this is a terrestrial planet that has habitants on it, and it does have some Hutts residing on it, but it's a more or less known planet because it's a little bit too hot here, and other than the fact that it does have the native population living here, there is really nothing we know about it. So I'm going to place its two moons, and we don't really know the names of these moons either, so it's going to be a randomly generated moon called Simankori. Korea and Rukmanstask, I think. Pronounce this as you will. Anyway, so here are its 2 randomly generated moons and the planet called Nalkoska. The third, and this is the most important planet in the system, is Nalhata. Now, it has a lot of history behind it, and it's actually a planet where originally it was actually called Evokar. This was the original name because there was a species called Evokai that used to live here, and this was their planet. Now, what happened to Evokai is actually really interesting and kind of defines how Huts like to do business. So, Evokai were not particularly intelligent or not particularly clever because they decided to start gambling, start doing business with the Huts, and after hundreds of years, they essentially lost their planets to the debts to the Huts. Cartels, which decided to claim this planet for themselves when their old planet called Varla was no longer suitable for their own interest and for their life. And so they moved to Evokar and renamed it Nalhata. They then enslaved the Evokai and forced them to build their temples, forced them to build all kinds of construction here, all of their factories, and this originally beautiful swampy planet has turned into a nightmare that you'll see when I play through it in Star Wars The Old Republic near the end of the video. So essentially this become a polluted planet because the Huts have moved here and built all of their factories on this planet. And this planet, interestingly, has 5 moons, and one of the moons is actually very important. We'll get to it when we build the last moon. And the moon I'm talking about is called Nar Shaddaa. Now, this is actually not exactly what it looks like. I tried to recreate this as accurate as possible, but this would be Nar Shaddaa before it got settled by the Huts. Now, so Nar Shaddaa is actually mentioned in many different novels. It's mentioned in Clone Wars. It's also mentioned in almost every single Star Wars video game because it's a very important location. It's actually the location that always tries to compete with Coruscant because it is the only other planet that is entirely a city. It's actually really interesting. I'll get to show you what it looks like in Star Wars The Old Republic as well. It's a very beautiful location. It's actually one of my most favorite locations in Star Wars The Old Republic. And so the interesting thing about Nar Shaddaa is that it's essentially become the center for the Hutt cartels. They moved from Nalhata because it became a little bit too polluted for them. They still have some of their residences and some of their temples there, but they moved to Nar Shaddaa, and this is where they run the entire galaxies from. Basically, this is where you come to do business with the Huts. And essentially, they mined Nalhata, and then they moved all of their mined materials to Nar Shaddaa, where essentially you do most of your trade, business, and all kinds of illegal activities as well. So a lot of the buildings on Nar Shaddaa were actually built by the Evokai when they got enslaved by the Huts. They actually sent them here and made them build the entire cities. And so the entire construction of Nar Shaddaa was done by the slave forces that the Huts were able to essentially send here from Nalhata. And Nalhata itself is relatively empty now. It's basically a swampy, deserted, polluted area where all of the species died out and only the most resilient of the species have survived. And I'll show you some of them in the Star Wars The Old Republic. And on Nar Shaddaa, it's actually interesting because basically the entire planet was transformed and became a city. And here, once the city was finished, the Evokai, they actually evolved as well. As a matter of fact, most of them moved under the city. They lived in the lower levels of the city where they've, over the 500 years after the construction of the original city, they've evolved into this kind of a dangerous looking species that basically thrives on killing everything it sees. And what's important to mention is that the main difference between Coruscant and Nar Shaddaa is that Coruscant only has dangerous levels on the bottom, whereas Nar Shaddaa is, the entire city is essentially a filthy, polluted, infested with crime place where you essentially just go to either hide from something or to cause trouble. And so that's Nar Shaddaa and Nalhata, and we'll get to investigate them in a little bit more detail in Star Wars The Old Republic. And let's continue with the 4th planet here. The fourth planet is called Nal Yeshu, and unfortunately we don't really know the name of its two moons, but we know that they are there. And Nal Yeshu is another colonized terrestrial planet that actually has something like 10 billion sentient beings living on it. So it's actually a relatively important planet as well. It's just we don't really unfortunately know much about it, but we know that it's controlled by the Hutts as well. And then we come to the gas giant that is in the system, and it's called Kiskua. Now, this is a gas giant that is probably one of the few locations that doesn't actually have many Hutts, or no Hutts at all, actually. And it does have something like 18 different moons, so we're going to actually add them. Now, interestingly, one of these moons is super interesting. So let me just count that I'm doing this correctly. All right, so there we go, 17 moons of Kiskua, and one of the moons, we don't actually know which one, but one of them has a very interesting atmospheric effect. Let's just say it's this one here, electrical atmosphere, where they have actually found organic and unicellular life living inside the atmosphere. So it's actually a gas giant that does have life on it. But other than that, we don't really know much about Kiskua or its importance in the Star Wars galaxy, at least for now. And lastly, we come to the last planet here, and this is the cold planet called Narheka. Now, this cold planet is surprisingly also inhabited by the Hutts, and it does have a little bit of settlements here. Now, even though it doesn't look like a habitable planet, they've actually created these domes where they've created atmosphere needed for their survival, and they do have certain species that they've even delivered to this planet so that it can actually become their future home one day. So they've even brought vegetation and different kinds of flora and fauna to this planet just to make it more sustainable. But just like every other object in this solar system, it's of course controlled by one of the Hutts and their criminal mind. And so this is kind of what this system looks like from the top here. You can kind of see there's SEM really close. There's Nal Koska right here, Nal Hata and Nar Shaddaa, Nal Yeshu, then we have Kiskua, the gas giant, and a very cold planet called Narheka. Now let's actually explore a little bit more of Nal Hata and also Nar Shaddaa in more detail by using Star Wars: The Old Republic, because you actually get to visit these two planets and moons, and you get to actually do things on them and basically explore them in more detail. And welcome to the Glorious Jewel. Now, Hata means glorious jewel in Huttese because of a really interesting effect that you can see in the skies. It's actually formed by a radioactive gas cloud from a nearby solar system in the system of Ganath. And because of this, they actually thought that this is a very beautiful location for their new colony and their new homeworld. But this is how Han Solo describes this planet to Chewbacca. Now, Hata means glorious jewel in Huttese, but trust me, pal, it ain't pretty. Bunch of swamps and bogs, and the whole place stinks like a sewer in the middle of a garbage dump. And honestly, I think this is a pretty good description of this planet because it is overpolluted, it looks very dangerous, it probably doesn't smell very good here, and the only species that have survived here are, well, at least one of the few species are called chemilizards that are able to extract nutrients from the industrial waste of the Hata planet, but no one else has been able to survive here. Now, as I mentioned before, the Evokai species used to call this Evokar, but something like 15,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Hutts came and decided to replace the government here and created their own new homeworld. And surprisingly, the Galactic Republic actually supported the Hutts because technically they had all the legal rights to own this planet. But what you may not know is that for thousands of years, Hutts have never actually supported the Republic or the Empire and have always been managed or have always been able to stay quite neutral even during the Galactic War.
There it is, the belly of the beast. It doesn't look like we're gonna have to break in, but the place is crawling with Vothra's cronies.
And so even though the Galactic Empire did try to control the planet Nal Hata and Nar Shaddaa, for the most part, Hutts were able to actually maintain full control and never really budged in terms of supporting one side or the other. But what's really sad is that originally this planet was actually a very lush jungle filled with oceans and lots of different species living here. But because Hutts decided to terraform this into their own sort of preferred polluted barren wasteland, most of the species here eventually disappeared and basically died out. And so most of the surface now is covered by flat marshy bogs and swamps. There's a lot of muddy puddles and patches of marsh grass. And it does have some insects and spiders living here, but other than dangerous, scary creatures, there's really nothing you can find. And all of the raw materials that were actually strip mined here were then transported to Nar Shaddaa for processing and for export. And so I think this kind of gives you an idea of how Hutts like to live their lives. They basically come somewhere destroyed and then move to a new world. And for thousands of years, this planet was actually controlled by some of the oldest Hutt families known as the Clans of the Ancients, who watched activities on both Nal Hutta and Nar Shaddaa from their homes on different planets. But interestingly for the Hutts, Nal Hutta is actually considered to be paradise. This is actually where most of them want to live, where most of them want to own some kind of property, even though to everyone else this is a living nightmare, a disgusting and a dangerous place to visit. And actually many races use this planet as a kind of a place where they would actually threaten to send their children if they misbehave. And so this is Nal Hutta, or as it's more commonly known, Hutta in a nutshell. And we're also going to take a look at the more beautiful world called Nar Shaddaa, where Hutts have actually established a very, very interesting and very fully functioning city empire. And so Nar Shaddaa is actually a very beautiful location to visit, especially in Star Wars The Old Republic. And this is essentially a whole city planet, similar in a sense to the planet we took a look at before, called Coruscant, which is of course the center of the Galactic Empire. Now, one thing I've actually already mentioned, but I wanted to reiterate, is that 500 years after the construction of the city, the Evokai who were responsible for building this were actually freed from their labor. They became free species, and the Hutts released their species from slavery. And because Evokai didn't really have anywhere to go anymore, they took refuge under the city, under the Nar Shaddaa undercity, and began to mutate into savages. They actually have become a very dangerous, very kind of a scary looking species, and will most likely attack anyone on sight now. And at this point in the game, this is about maybe 4,000 or 5,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, Nar Shaddaa is actually rivaling Coruscant. As a matter of fact, it's one of the hubs of interstellar trade, and they always try to compete with Coruscant for being the most important trade in the galaxy. But because something like 4,000 years ago there was a battle that disrupted the hyperspace routes, eventually Nal Hutta and Nar Shaddaa devolved into a kind of a haven for smugglers and pirates, because the galactic trade was no longer possible, and instead they actually became the smuggling capital of the galaxy. So if you want to do any kind of a crime, or if you just want to hide from someone, or if you want to go to a casino and spend all of your money, or do anything illegal in the galaxy, this is essentially where you would come, because this is the biggest pit of the biggest illegal and villainous activities you can kind of imagine. And this, I think, really kind of summarizes Nar Shaddaa really well, because if you want to do absolutely anything illegal, this is where you would come. But despite all of this, I think Nar Shaddaa is a very beautiful place with, filled with all kinds of neon signs, all kinds of activity, and there's a lot of things going on here, especially if you play Star Wars The Old Republic, where you'll get to learn a little bit more about the history of Star Wars Galaxy, and of course learn more about the Hutts, the Hutt space, which covers a very large part of the Star Wars Galaxy, and also get to interact with Hutts themselves that do at some point betray you. Not to spoil this for you, but watch out for the Hutts. Welcome back to episode 12 of Recreating Star Wars with Universe Sandbox 2. This is Anton, and today we're going to be recreating Mandalore. This is where it's located in the galaxy, Star Wars Galaxy, and this is what we're going to be remaking today using this beautiful game. Alright, let's start. So this is the star, and it has several planets. It actually has 9 planets orbiting around it, and the first planet is known as Nog, the Syrian rock that is known as Nog. So this is the planet that's relatively close to the star and is obviously not inhabited, doesn't really have much things going on it, except for, of course, for occasional mining that Mandalorians do on this planet. And the second planet that orbits Mandalore is known as Akan, which means war in Mandalorian language. And this planet doesn't have any atmosphere. It has 2 moons orbiting around it. You can kind of see them right there in the distance. And this planet is basically a barren world that Mandalorians sometimes use for training. But other than being very, very inhospitable and very scary looking, it really doesn't have much going for it. It's not even a mining colony. There's basically just nothing here. The third planet from the star is known as Tracen, and Tracen in Mandalorian means fire. For obvious reasons, this is a planet of fire. Now, this planet also has 4 moons orbiting around it, and if you look at one of the moons, it's smoking. It's smoking because it's actually still really hot in this region of space, and it's losing a lot of its atmosphere and possibly water as well because it's just being evaporated. Now, we don't really know the names of these moons, but I just randomly generated 4 of them, and this is them orbiting around this beautiful planet. And the fourth planet is known as Kalevala. This is a toxic desert planet that is surprisingly also known for its pacifist population. So people who don't like fighting, or Mandalorians who actually want to avoid fighting, usually are either from here or settle here. And the Duchess, who actually at some point becomes the leader of Mandalorians, or at least Mandalorians in the system, is actually from this planet as well. And I believe her name was Satine Kryze, or Kryze, and this person was the leader of this particular system sometime during the more recent events that we get to see in the Star Wars movies as well. And the fifth planet here is Mandalore. So this is a planet that's very, very Earth-like in its position around the star, and also its mass and its size, and of course its temperature. And essentially this is where Mandalorian culture was born, and this culture is very, very complex. There's actually quite a lot of books written about it in the Star Wars legends, and even in the Star Wars canon, there's quite a lot of Mandalorian stuff going on. And specifically here, we're obviously talking about the character of Boba Fett and Jango Fett, which are essentially Mandalorians. They're essentially the representative of this particular culture. This planet has 2 moons orbiting around it, and one of the moons, Concordia, is a sort of almost like an exile for certain people. So in more recent times in Star Wars, specifically in the movies, during the movie time, this moon of Concordia is used for exiling anyone who's too warlike, who actually wants to start a war, because Mandalorian culture actually, or Mandalorians living in the system, actually want to become more pacifist. But just in general, I just wanted to actually talk a little bit about the Mandalorians and possibly even teach you a little bit more about their culture, because it's actually very fascinating. So first of all, they originally stem from an extinct species called Tong, and these species used to live here, and they basically had this warlike culture, but at some point they became extinct, but their culture continued through the idea of Mandalorians, which basically became people of different races living together under the same kind of ideals. And they're essentially a group of warriors that often become mercenaries or bounty hunters. They're very warlike. They can also be hired to participate in any kind of a war, and they've actually participated in many different wars, but usually on the side of the Sith and not on the side of the Jedi. They also usually have only one leader, and this leader is called Mandalore. During the Star Wars trilogy, Mandalore was Boba Fett, and before that it was his father Jango Fett. But unfortunately, by the time of Star Wars trilogy, both Boba Fett and Jango Fett are basically just lonely representatives of their culture, because Mandalorians have been spread across the galaxy and they are no longer a united people. But what's really cool about their culture is that they're usually ranked as the best fighters in the galaxy, and the reason for that is because, well, normally it would be Jedi, right? But the thing is, on their planet, there is actually a really interesting iron called Mandalorian iron, also known as Beskar, which if you basically make your armor out of it, it will be impenetrable to any lightsaber. And this is essentially what they're famous for. So their armor is immune to lightsabers, and because of that, they're technically the best warriors in the galaxy. And they also have cutting-edge weaponry. They have really strict code of honor that they always follow. They always wear their Crusader armor that usually differs from soldier to soldier depending on your rank and your achievement. And as the best fighters, they usually thrive on battle, and basically this is their life. So they're truly the best warriors in the galaxy. Now, there's actually quite a lot of characters that appear throughout Star Wars that are Mandalorians, and the most famous ones are obviously Boba Fett, also his father Jango Fett, then of course Mandalore himself. Mandalore the First was essentially one of the more famous leaders, and he appears in one of the earlier stories and earlier lore from Star Wars. But there's actually another famous character from video games, and this particular character was known as Canderous Ordo, and Canderous Ordo was one of the companions that you got to play with during the Knights of the Old Republic game, and he actually helps the main character on his quest to reclaim his memories. And I don't want to spoil the game because we're actually going to be playing it together at some point. But essentially, yeah, that character was also Mandalorian, and at some point he, I believe, does become Mandalore the leader. But what's really interesting is how their culture actually got destroyed. So it was at the hands of Jedi Revan and Malak during the Mandalorian Wars that unfortunately Mandalorians lost. And when they lost the war, what Revan did was, first of all, he destroyed our culture, destroying armor and weaponry as well, but he also hid the mask of Mandalore, preventing the new leader from actually arising. So this is essentially why their culture was destroyed, because without the mask, they couldn't actually go through the ritual of starting or getting a new leader. And because of this, they had to evolve into a completely new culture of wandering mercenaries and conquerors rather than warriors living on this particular planet. Anyway, well, let's keep going. There's actually more planets for us to create, and we're gonna continue talking about their culture as we're creating more planets. Planet number 6 is called Mandalia, and Mandalia is famous for a species called Mandalian giants, which are actually really powerful warriors as well. And this particular planet has one moon orbiting around it. You can see it right there in the distance. Then after Mandalia, we're going to have 2 gas giants similar to our solar system. There's going to be 2 gas giants here, and the first gas giant is known as Bonagal, and Bonagal is a gas giant quite similar to Saturn, and it has at least 34 different moons orbiting around it. You can kind of see them in the distance, and essentially that's all we know about it. We know that some of its moons are obviously used for mining, and we also know that it is a gas giant that is relatively large in size compared to other gas giants, but nothing else is known about it. And the second gas giant that has 30 moons around it is known as Shukut, and Shukut means crush. Now, why it means crush, or why this giant is named as crush, is not really known, but you can only speculate that something must have happened and someone got crushed on this particular gas giant, or maybe that's how it actually interacts with other planets in this solar system. And the last 9th planet in this system is known as Werda. Werda means darkness, and because this planet is really far away from everything, it's really cold, and it's really dark. You can kind of see the rest of the solar system right there, but Werda is far, it's cold, and there's really nothing going on this planet as well. And before we finish this video, I just briefly wanted to talk about Jango Fett, who was technically one of the best Mandalorians who have ever lived and who will ever live. And during, or actually way after all of the Mandalorian Wars, when their culture was already sort of destroyed, Jango was one of the few survivors not being captured by the Jedi that were actually looking for Mandalorians, trying to punish them and trying to imprison them. And although the Jedi Council tried to lay a trap for Jango Fett, he not only avoided the trap, but he actually single-handedly managed to slay half of the members of the Jedi Council, which is actually very impressive. Because he slayed those members, this is when Count Dooku decided to leave the Council and then essentially joined the Sith. And because he was able to escape and was known for his prowess, he was chosen by the species called Tyrannus as essentially as the genetic source for the clone army being created on the planet called Kamino, which was a hidden planet we get to discover in Episode 2 of Star Wars. And it's also speculated that the so-called Republic Commando Order 66, which was responsible for killing so many Jedi in Episode 3, was also motivated by Jango Fett's hatred of the Jedi, and because a lot of these soldiers were actually his genetic clones, they were so successful at actually killing so many Jedi at the same time. But one of the reasons he actually agreed to basically being cloned and creating this army is because his goal was to eventually create the so-called Mandalorian army, to recreate Mandalorian glory, and the Tyrannus gave him this opportunity through the creation of the so-called clones, which of course later became the Stormtroopers. And the clone trooper armor is essentially based on the Mandalorian gear, so all together this is actually all connected. So the Mandalorians essentially influenced the look behind the Stormtrooper armor, and obviously a lot of the Stormtrooper ideology is based on Mandalorians as well. And something like 23 years after the Battle of Yavin, his son Boba Fett became the Mandalore, became the great leader, but as we know, he actually does die a horrible death, being digested for thousands of years in the pit of Sarlacc, and so this unfortunately happens to the greatest leader of the Mandalorian people. But even today, they still exist. There's quite a lot of Mandalorians in the Star Wars galaxy, and quite a lot of smaller communities scattered around the galaxy. But most of them actually are still located in this particular solar system, and essentially this is what their culture is all about. Anyway, I hope you learned something new today, and I hope you enjoyed this video where we recreated the Mandalorian system of Rao, the star known as Rao, and we talked a little bit about their culture and their ideology. Welcome to Endor. This is a gas giant about which we'll learn in Star Wars Episode 6 that has a small moon called the Moon of Endor, where the Empire was planning to construct a new Death Star. Now today we're going to do a little bit of discussion and science and a little bit of math on what happened to Ewoks. And hopefully by the end of this video you'll find out if Ewoks are still alive. Welcome to What the Math and enjoy the video. Now, to be honest, I got inspired to make this video because I've actually read a paper by a professor from Purdue University by the name of David Milton, who actually analyzed the idea of Ewok survival after the destruction of the Death Star. Now, this is a paper you can actually find in the description of this video. I posted a link for it. But let's start with the basics. This is the gas giant. We still have to construct the moon. So we're going to go into the moons here and create a randomly generated moon a little bit away from Endor. And this moon is going to be known as the Moon of Endor, for the lack of better names. Usually this moon and also this planet had the same name, according to Star Wars Wikipedia at least. And also the two stars that we have here, this is a binary star system, they're also known as Endor 1 and Endor 2. You see them in the background right there. So this is going to be our Moon of Endor. Doesn't exactly look like the tropical paradise that we see in the actual movie, but we can change that by maybe adding a little bit of water here. And before we change the composition, let's actually discuss another feature of this moon, and that's density. So Professor David Milton actually goes into detail about what he thinks the mass of this moon is, and he actually calculates it very precisely, or relatively precisely, to basically more massive than Mars and about 15% more massive than Earth. So we are going to actually change its mass, and actually I need to change it to this planet. We're going to change this mass to 1.15 masses of Earth. So you can see it starts growing right away because we just changed the mass of this moon. Now, but the other thing is that it's much smaller than Mars, and which means that it's actually very, very dense. Alright, so I've played around with the values a little bit, and so the mass is 1.15 masses of Earth. We also have a radius of 5,114 kilometers, but this is actually almost the double the size of the actual moon, according to Wikipedia. On Wikipedia it says that the size of this moon is, at least the radius of this moon, is about 2,500 kilometers, so it's actually much, much smaller. Which suggests that this moon has a very, very high density, and even if I change everything to iron, which is the most dense material we have in this game, it still doesn't reach the required size, which suggests that it's very likely that the Moon of Endor is made up of some really, really dense materials, like, for example, uranium, or possibly, and that's actually what Professor Milton suggests as well, possibly uranium, and maybe even things like osmium, which is the most dense material we know today. So there's a very interesting composition, and this is something that I think someone should write a paper on as well. What composition would Moon of Endor have, which suggests that maybe Ewoks might be some sort of super creatures that don't even have iron in their blood. Maybe they have some other heavier materials that are even more dense than iron. Anyway, we're not going to talk about that yet. We're going to talk about something different. So, unfortunately, the current version of the game does not allow me to change the density without changing other parameters. So we're going to have to keep it at 12.3, even though it's a little bit lower than the calculated value of about 14.9, I think. That's what he calculates the density of Moon of Endor to be. So let's just maybe add a little bit of water so we have some lakes here and clouds and stuff. And as we add a little bit of water, you'll notice it will start acquiring oceans and rivers and transform into a more beautiful moon. So there you go. This is a little bit better than before. Now, okay, so that's ready. Now, what's the next part? So he also talks about the distance where the Death Star 2 is located, and using the size of Moon of Endor is able to calculate the size of the Death Star 2. And here the size is approximately 343 kilometers in diameter. So we're going to add another smaller moon orbiting around Moon of Endor. And it orbits at a distance of about 460-ish kilometers above the surface. So it's actually relatively close to the surface, so we're going to place it right here. Okay, and here we go. So Death Star 2 is in orbit now, relatively close to the Moon of Endor. Now, in his paper, he talks about how possibly the Death Star is actually in some sort of Endor synchronous orbit, basically right above the surface of one of the features on the land here. But the thing is, if it has any kind of a synchronous orbit, that means this would suggest that this particular moon has a very, very fast rotation speed of about 1 hour per rotation, which suggests that it would have 30-minute days, 30-minute nights, and it would most likely not even be so spherical. It would actually be more like a very flattened sort of a rugby ball. So the only other way for this to be in a synchronous orbit is if there is some sort of technology like anti-gravity technology that is basically holding this above the surface, which is quite possible. But nevertheless, we're not going to try to explain this. We're just going to basically make this more realistic in terms of mass and also size. Now, there's another paper by a few students from, I believe it's called Lehigh University, I might have mispronounced this, that actually calculated the mass of the Death Star 2 to be about 10 to the power of 19 kilograms. So it's a little bit lighter than we have it here. So we're going to lower this to about 10 to 19. Which also suggests that maybe it has a little bit less density, because obviously there's a lot of empty space on the inside. Alright, so that's done. So we have our Death Star 2 orbiting around Moon of Endor, and everything looks fine until things go wrong for the Death Star. So as the Death Star 2 was constructed, obviously the rebels found out, they attacked it, this was a trap. But the rebels prevailed and were able to destroy it. And this is when things get really interesting. So even though we get to see the scenes of Ewoks celebrating the victory and everyone is really happy that the Death Star 2 is now destroyed, what this professor and a lot of actually other scientists, specifically here we're talking about 11 scientists from very prestigious universities, discuss is that because this is such a massive object and because it's so close to the surface of the moon, and also because when things get destroyed, you do create a lot of energy. First of all, it's very likely that some of the fragments that essentially get released in the initial explosion would fall onto the surface of the Moon of Endor and heat up the atmosphere to the point where all of the water would most likely boil away from the surface. That's step number one. So the fragments that we're going to create when we destroy this are basically going to essentially evaporate the entire surface of Endor and very likely also burn down all of the forests. Now, we don't really know how much of the actual moon fell onto the surface, but we're going to, for a second, assume that if it's actually using this gravity technology to hold itself off the surface, and if you destroy the moon, which actually in the movie, if you watch the episode 6 again, you'll see that it's not destroyed in a very sort of dramatic way. As a matter of fact, it explodes relatively slowly, so when it finishes exploding, it's very likely that all of this chunk just sort of collapses onto the surface, which is what we're going to recreate here and see what happens if that actually occurs. And this is actually where some papers sort of differ on how they explain the explosion. So Professor Minton actually is a little bit more conservative with his values, but one of the papers talks about the speed of fragments as high as 200,000 kilometers per hour, which is actually very high, which would very likely possibly eliminate the entire Moon of Endor. It would be completely devastated by this explosion. But what we're going to do is a little bit less dramatic. So we're going to go with Professor Minton's idea here and assume that as soon as the rebels essentially destroyed the core of the Death Star 2, the gravity generator stopped. So in other words, the actual Death Star 2 no longer held itself off the ground and then just slowly descended onto the surface from the altitude of about, I guess, 460 kilometers above the surface. And so we're going to just wait until this Death Star gets to the brighter surface of the moon and then stop its velocity and make it essentially smack down onto surface. So let's see what happens if this actually occurs. So this is essentially a recreation of the death of Death Star 2. And let's just go into here, and what we're going to do is we're going to go into actions right here and press the 0 velocity button as soon as we're on the brighter sort of side of Moon of Endor. And I think we also want to be a little bit in front of it, because if I actually release the velocity right now, the moon of Endor is going to fly away from us, and because it's actually orbiting the 2 stars and also the gas giant Endor, it's going to basically escape from us. We want to do this right around here. I think this is a good spot, and here we go. 0 velocity. The reactor has been destroyed, and suddenly the Death Star has nothing holding it. It starts falling onto the surface of Moon of Endor, and we're just going to watch its total velocity. So according to Professor Minton, the total velocity at the time of impact should be around 2.8 kilometers per second. Let's see what we get here based on the calculations in the game. And so just watch the velocity graph right here, and right around, I'm going to pause this for a second just to slow down time, and right around the time of impact, the velocity is, it's already over 2 kilometers per second, so we might actually get very close to these predictions. And here we go, 2.4. This is already really fast. Imagine a very large 300 kilometer object moving toward you at 2 kilometers per second. And this is what, okay, so it was just under, I think it was just under 2.8, or maybe right around 2.8. So imagine you're standing on Endor celebrating, you know, the death of Death Star 2, and suddenly you see this. So if Ewoks had actually experienced this, this is what would happen. This is what would happen to their moon. And I don't think there would be much celebration. So first of all, look at the large shockwave that's sort of going around this this moon, and then just look at what happens to the actual surface of this object as well. So we have a bunch of fragments flying away. The explosion is tremendously large. The shockwave would most likely generate huge tsunamis, lots of earthquakes, and according to the calculations, the actual crater that would be left by this impact would be about 4 times bigger than the impact from the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs on our planet. So this would be about 700 kilometers in diameter, which is a huge crater when you think about it. And so the explosion here would essentially cause an extinction event on this moon. And in the fragments that are about to fall down here would actually obviously cause their own damage in various parts of the moon as well. But let's just keep watching what happens to this particular moon. We're gonna accelerate this just a little bit, and let's see how much the temperature increases. So the original temperature here was about 30 degrees Celsius, and we're still not done with the impacts and everything else here. Surprisingly, the water did not evaporate, but I think that's because this particular simulation doesn't actually show us what happens when the atmosphere gets heated up. But based on the number of fragments that were flying around and just the size of the Death Star, it's very likely that the atmosphere would actually heat up so much that the entire ocean here would be boiled away. And all of the poor little Ewoks would be all boiled into little jerkies. And by the way, in one of the previous videos, I did talk about how apparently Ewoks were actually a game for certain races in Star Wars universe, and they were even hunted for their jerky. So people actually, not people, but various races used to come to this particular moon. And whoa, what just happened? Okay, I think I broke the game. I think I accidentally turned the 0 velocity off for the Moon of Endor as well, and it crashed into the gas giant. That was not supposed to happen. That was totally not supposed to happen. But you know what? This is what happens if Moon of Endor crashes on Endor the gas giant. Alright, luckily I saved the game. Let's go back for a second. And this time we're going to try it again, but going at a slightly higher velocity. So I'm going to change the velocity to something about 10 kilometers per second, which is actually one of the other predictions from the other scientists that talked about the actual Death Star explosion accelerating the particles and fragments to much higher speed. So we're going to change this to 9 kilometers per second, and it's going to accelerate by the time it gets to the moon. And here we go, explosion number 2 at a slightly faster speed, and look at that. Look at how much bigger this is. So what this suggests is that had the velocity been even bigger, and we actually just chose the smallest possible velocity, it literally just fell onto the surface. But if the velocity of fragments was higher, the actual explosion, the actual fragments colliding with the moon of Endor would create a much larger impact, and would obviously cause a lot more destruction and a lot more collisions and a lot more destruction on the surface. And you can see that this is a much more powerful event, where basically the entire moon is essentially just completely bombarded by these fragments that are falling everywhere. And this is, of course, if the Death Star 2 has exploded so dramatically that it actually sort of created a huge amount of fragments that flew at really high velocities. And alright, so that's attempt number 2, and just for fun, let's do this again, but we're going to accelerate it even more. We're actually going to go with the highest velocity I could find. So one of the first scientists to publish a paper about the extinction of Ewoks. Oh, wow, I actually just warmed up my planet so much that it melted everything. It was, for some reason, it was frozen before, but the water has melted and the temperature is still increasing. So yeah, one of the other scientists actually predicted that maybe this speed would even be as high as 220,000 miles per hour, which is about 354,000 kilometers per hour, which essentially means moving at a speed of about 100 kilometers per second. So let's try this again, going at even higher velocity, 10 times higher velocity than we were moving at. So once again, we're going to go into actions, change this to 0 velocity. I'm going to have to slow down time here because this has to be very precise. And as the speed starts increasing, we're going to go to kilometers per second and change this to 100. So this is essentially, if all of these fragments were moving so fast that they collided with the moon of Endor at a ridiculously high speed. And the total speed here is going to be just over 100 kilometers per second. And this is what essentially would happen. And observe the destruction that would occur on the moon of Endor had all of this been true, and had Ewoks been real creatures living somewhere in a galaxy far away. And the first thing you'll notice is the much larger explosion that was created by this impact, and of course the huge shockwave that's about to go everywhere around the moon. You'll notice that the surface around the impact has already started changing. It's sort of more scorched, it's melted, and I have a feeling this planet might even melt completely. It might actually turn into a fireball. But look at the size of that shockwave. It's just going across the entire moon. So all of those Ewoks, except for maybe some on the other side of the planet, would be instantly eliminated, and the ones on the other side of the planet would very likely experience all of these fragments that are about to fall. There you go, there's one fragment right there. All of these fragments would basically finish them off. And if that wasn't enough, so the temperature change here would be so dramatic that all of the forest would basically die. All of the life as we know it on Endor would very likely disappear. And Ewoks, no matter how resilient they were, would very likely die of hunger, essentially. They would just starve to death. And so you're witnessing the face of Moon of Endor after such a large impact. So it didn't really change as dramatically as I guess I would hoped for, but nevertheless, even this size of a crater, or this size of an impact, would be so devastating that it would essentially cause a very massive extinction. And see how fragments are still coming back? So it's not over for poor Ewoks. They're still being bombarded by these extra fragments everywhere. And some of the fragments even went to the gas giant Endor, and they are bombarding it as well. So this would be quite an interesting view from the surface of Endor. If you just stand here and look into the sky, you see all of these Death Star fragments smacking onto the surface of the gas giant as well, and essentially causing a dramatic explosion everywhere. Look at this beauty. And I have a strange feeling that for some reason we're actually close into the gas giant once again, and we might actually smack into it. Because I think when I press the 0 velocity button, it actually for some reason slowed down the velocity of my Moon of Endor as well. So we're going to be crashing into it. Now, the actual collision would not actually change the orbit of Moon of Endor dramatically, but it would definitely shift it a little bit. So it wouldn't be even the same orbit around the gas giant. And here we go. This is going to be our second collision with the gas giant of Endor. And this is what it looks like from the surface of the planet. Oh no, we're falling onto the surface, and there we go. Dramatic explosions everywhere. Okay, so, and that's all I really wanted to talk about in this video, and hopefully you enjoyed it. I hope you learned a little bit more about how actual real professors and scientists around the world do take Star Wars seriously and actually use real-life mathematics to try to calculate if things that were mentioned in Star Wars were actually possible. And I think this is a pretty cool example of how many people do take science fiction seriously, because it inspired generations of people to become scientists, first of all, but also because sometimes it's actually important to differentiate between, you know, a drama that we get to see in Star Wars and actual science, which it might not be explained really well in some cases. So here we are around a planet that's procedurally generated in Space Engine, and this is actually a very, very beautiful terrestrial planet that orbits this very unusual star that you'll see somewhere out there. There's actually quite a lot of stars here, and this is right in the middle of the Orion Nebula. This is a relatively realistic representation of the system and what it would look like inside of this system. There's that planet. We're going to escape it. But anyway, that's not why we're here. Today we're going to try to discover several planets that may actually resemble something we may have encountered in Star Wars, and this is actually according to NASA and a few other scientific websites that analyzed many exoplanets and discovered something that may resemble something from Star Wars. And the first one probably is the most popular. Let's go to a star, and I guess a planet by the name of Kepler 16b. This is actually the planet that we're looking for, and we're going to zoom into it right away and look at what we see. And look at this beauty. It's a very, very beautiful ringed planet. It's a cold gas giant, as it is basically procedurally generated in the game, but it could be something else. It actually is very likely to be some kind of a Earth-like terrestrial planet based on its mass. I'm going to accelerate time here just to see, or just to show you how all of this beauty looks like once it starts spinning. Now, why are we here? Well, it's actually because of the stars. If you look into the skies, right above the planetary horizon, you'll discover that there are two eyes looking at you. There are two stars. And this is exactly why we're here. This is essentially a representation of what it might be like living on Tatooine, the birthplace of Luke Skywalker, or not really the birthplace, but the place where he was raised. Tatooine had two stars, and we get to witness this in one of the scenes in the first Star Wars movie that came out several decades ago. And this is one of those candidates that has two stars, that has a binary system. And essentially, this is a planet where we kind of have a very similar sky. So if you were to stand on the surface of this gas giant and you were to look into the skies, you would basically see this very beautiful orbital dance of two stars in the skies. And so that's Kepler 16b, and that's Tatooine. Next one is OGLE 2005 BLG 390LB. Let's zoom into it. Let's find out what it looks like. And not exactly what I expected. This is a temperate Terra. Now, in reality, though, as we've discovered based on the positioning of this planet in the solar system, it's very likely to be a very, very, very cold world. Now, we're going to look into the skies and try to find its star. And as you can see, it's actually a relatively dark-ish star. It's basically a red dwarf. And here, because of this red dwarf, this planet will not be getting as much heat, as much warmth, and will very likely end up being very, very cold. So this right here is supposed to be Hoth. Although in Space Engine, turns out that it's a little bit warmer than it should be, and it seems to be a relatively comfortable -9 degrees Celsius on the surface. Although that's still pretty cold. That's essentially the average temperature, and this would be a temperature that you'd experience on an average winter day somewhere in North America, somewhere in northern North America, or possibly somewhere in northern Europe. And this particular beautiful planet looks absolutely gorgeous. There's a volcano here. There is a lot of other really cool surface features. There's actually several volcanoes, it turns out. But yeah, this temperate Terra is cold and this is supposed to be hot. It's supposed to be covered in ice. So because I kind of feel cheated, I'm going to grab this star right there. That's a randomly generated star. And I'm going to actually zoom into it. And hopefully it will have some kind of an ice planet that we can take a look at, just so that you can actually see what these ice planets look like. So there's quite a lot of planets here. And the last one is right there. This is a cold ice world. And this will give you an idea of what Hoth might look like in Space Engine. And here we go. This would be an equivalent of Hoth minus 150 degrees Celsius. That is very, very cold. But nevertheless, according to NASA, OGLE star or planet that I showed you a few seconds ago is essentially Hoth. It's very cold, it's not very hospitable, and it's relatively far away from its red dwarf star. Anyway, moving on to the next one, and here we're going to go to a planet known as Korat 7b. And Korat 7b, as you'll see in a second, is a super hot planet. This is essentially a scorched desert as it's known in the simulation, and this would represent Mustafar. And this is a planet that's very, very close to its parent star. There it is. And so here, this is essentially a volcanic world that we see in the Revenge of the Sith episode 3. And also where the final battle between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker, also known as Darth Vader, take place as well. So this would be the volcanic world, even though here it kind of looks like a desert. In reality, it might be actually a little bit hotter than this. It might be completely volcanic, completely scorched, and the average temperature, according to the simulation, is approximately 1400 degrees Celsius. That is like a melting point of metal, essentially. And this is actually what a sunrise would look like if you were to stand on the side of this planet in this twilight area where it might actually not be too hot. And in this particular area, as you can see, the sun is kind of stuck on the horizon. And that's because this particular planet is actually always facing with the same side to the star. In other words, if you were to stand here, this is exactly what you would see every single day. The sun would just be kind of like this. Anyway, let's go to the next planet, and the next planet is going to be a super ocean Camino. And specifically here, we're talking about a world known as Kepler 22b. And this is, according to NASA, what an actual water world would look like. So here it does have rings, although in Star Wars, we don't really know if Camino had rings. This is where the clone army was actually created in secrecy. And if you've watched the first episode of Star Wars, you may remember that this was a very, very dark, very sort of wet ocean world where Obi-Wan Kenobi goes and tries to discover what's going on there. And this is what this particular world looks like in Space Engine. And so here we have these beautiful rings. We have quite a lot of clouds. It does look very wet, and it's actually a hot Oceania with an average temperature of 153 degrees Celsius. This probably means that the water is a little bit toasty, possibly just vapor actually, but chances are that if the pressure here is very, very, very high, then the water can actually exist in liquid form as well. And what you're observing right now is the shadow of the rings, the shadow formed by the rings from the sun that's actually behind us, or from the star that's behind us. And that's Kepler 22b, that's essentially Camino. Next, let's go to a planet that might actually resemble our planet Earth. And this particular world, known as Kepler 452b, is about 1.5 billion years older than our own Earth. And in this case, it also has rings, but this actually might be a temperate terra. In other words, it might be a terrestrial world, very, very similar to our own Earth, just a little bit bigger, a little bit heavier, and a little bit older. In this case, according to NASA, maybe if there's actually some kind of an ancient civilization living here, this might actually be Coruscant, the so-called megacity world or metropolis world that we get to see in many parts of Star Wars, where a lot of different things happen. And this was, according to Star Wars mythology, the center of the galaxy. This is where everything happened. This is the world that everybody wants to own and everybody wants to live on. Or I guess some people do. In Space Engine, this world looks absolutely gorgeous because of those beautiful rings, and this is what it looks like if you were to stand on the surface and to basically look at those rings in the sky. Now let's actually go somewhere a little bit closer here, so we get to experience these rings in their full glory. Look at that. Look how beautiful this is. And so this might be Coruscant, according to NASA. Alright, let's go to the next world. And in this case, it might be a world that doesn't actually exist anymore. Specifically here, it's the world that might be just like Alderaan. A world destroyed by something. A planet that's completely been eliminated and it no longer exists. And in this case, it's actually the star that remains. And so, a few years ago, scientists witnessed that around this particular star, known as WD 1145-017, which is actually a white dwarf, this is essentially what will happen to our own sun in a few billion years, there was actually a planet that may have gotten a little bit too close to this particular star, and may actually have been destroyed by it. And so here, this particular world might represent Alderaan, might represent the world that was destroyed by the Death Star in episode 4 of Star Wars, when Darth Vader destroys the homeworld of Leia and basically uses his Death Star to do it. But in this case, it's not the Death Star, but it's the gravitational attraction and the tidal forces from the White Dwarf that may have actually destroyed this world as well, that NASA may have witnessed a few years ago. And so here is Alderaan. Now what about Dagobah, the swamp planet where we discovered Yoda? Well, if we go a little bit closer to home, to a planet known as Proxima b in Proxima Centauri system that's only about 4 light years away from our planet Earth, we'll discover an Earth-like planet. And maybe, just maybe, this Earth-like planet has life on it, and might actually be a swamp-like life, just like you see right here. Well, I guess that's not really a swamp, but it's some sort of a life, right? It's green, must be life. And this particular planet orbits around a red dwarf in its habitable zone, and it takes it about 14 days to orbit around it, so it's actually very, very fast. But because it's so close to home, a lot of scientists at NASA and other space agencies are very, very excited to discover what is actually going on this planet, because for all we know, there actually might be life. Or maybe this will be our future home in the next few hundred, thousands, or million years. And so this right here is Dagobah. Now in Force Awakens, we actually get to witness another desert world, and in this case, this is a desert world by the name of Jakku. There's quite a lot of these planets that are similar to Jakku, but the one that NASA thought resembles it the most might actually be in the system of Gliese 667. And here we're talking about Gliese 667 CC. This is actually a planet that you'll see in a second that has been used in other science fiction as well. As a matter of fact, this is the first planet terraformed by the Weyland Corporation, or is it Weyland Corporation? One of those, from the franchise Aliens, or Aliens vs. Predator, that is. And this was the first to be terraformed. This is an interesting cool desert here with minus 67 degrees Celsius on the surface. It has 2 stars as well. And it does have very beautiful rings. And not only is this planet very beautiful and has rings, but look at that. It has 1, 2, 3, and possibly even 4 beautiful, beautiful objects in its sky. I think this one is definitely a star. This one is a gas giant, and these 2 are also stars. So there's 2 orange dwarfs and 1 red dwarf in the skies of Gliese 667. So this is one of the coolest planets that we've visited so far, and definitely one of the coolest planets in science fiction as well. And so for all we know, this might be Jakku, or at least the planet that was actually terraformed in the Aliens and began the saga of Aliens vs. Predator. Okay, moving on to the next objects, and here it's going to be a little bit more difficult. So Endor, for example, is actually a moon of a gas giant. We haven't really officially discovered any moons, we only have some speculations, but in Space Engine there is actually quite a lot of moons out there. We can land on any one of them and pretend that it's Endor. So for example, if I were to escape this particular star system and to jump into any other random star system, there might be a gas giant there, and that particular gas giant, if it exists in this star system, might actually have... Okay, well, there's nothing here apparently. Let's go to the next one. Alright, this one has quite a lot of objects here. So let's find a gas giant in this system, and this gas giant very likely is going to have at least one moon orbiting around it, and that moon will be claimed as Endor, because why not? In other words, why wouldn't we claim it as Endor? There's a lot of gas giants out there. We actually found over 3,000 of them already, and many of them will have moons. Like, look how many there are here. This is ridiculous. This gas giant here has a tremendous amount of moons. And I'm gonna just pick the biggest one, the most beautiful one, I guess this one right here, and call it Endor. So there you go, we found our Endor, even though technically NASA hasn't really discovered an official one just yet. And of course we get to see the actual gas giants in Star Wars as well. Like, for example, Bespin is the gas giant where we witness the Cloud City, where Luke Skywalker has his battle with his father, and that of course is also something that's very, very common in our galaxy. There's quite a lot of them. But other than that, we don't really know specifically which one would resemble Bespin, and specifically which one we could actually use for building a Cloud City or mining. I guess we could use either one of them. As a matter of fact, we probably could use all of them if one day we discovered the technology to do so. Anyway, moving on to the last object I wanted to talk about, and this object is very, very close to home, and you may already know what it is. It's a moon of Saturn known as Mimas. And the reason we're visiting this particular moon is because of its unusual shape. Now, it's kind of difficult to see it from here unless I change the settings, but there you go. Maybe this is a little bit better. And I think this is maybe the best I'll do here. So if you look at this very closely and if you squint your eyes, you may witness or you may notice that this actually kind of looks like the Death Star. So not only does it look like a Death Star, but it seems to have very similar size to the Death Star 2. Maybe a little bit bigger than the actual Death Star 2. So officially, Mimas has become known as the Death Star lookalike because of this little crater that's created on the surface, or was created on the surface billions of years ago. And this was very likely a very large collision and very powerful collision that not only created this crater but also created this little mountain in the middle that was basically the result of a very powerful collision. And that's Mimas, the moon of Saturn. Hello wonderful person, this is Anton, and in today's video we're going to be using Minecraft, and specifically here we're going to actually use Minecraft in 3D or in 360 to talk about something related to Star Wars, because Rogue One is out and it's a pretty awesome movie that you should go and watch right now. Now this is a recreation of a Death Star by someone, I don't actually know who made it, but the mod is in the description below, you can download it yourself. But to make this video more educational, we're actually going to talk about why it would be quite impossible for us to construct a Death Star. Now, first of all, interestingly, back in 2012, there was actually a petition for the White House to ask the president to build the actual Death Star, and something like 35,000 people signed it. So the Obama administration had to respond, and they did respond saying that the administration shares your desire for job creation and a strong national defense, but the Death Star isn't on the horizon. And they basically went into detail how it's too expensive, how even though it would create jobs, it would also lose a lot of money, and because it has an ultimate flaw where a single X-Wing or a single spaceship can actually destroy it. So all in all, they basically decided not to make one. But nevertheless, I would like to talk about other facts why it would be impossible for us to make it. Not just the money, but also the actual science behind it. So first and foremost, the actual material, and here it would take us something like 800,000 years of output of basically metal to create enough metal for essentially the hull of the Death Star. So we will need a lot of metal, and it's just not enough produced right now to even build this thing. And on top of that, all of the pollution from production of this metal would most likely turn our Earth completely inhospitable. It would basically create too much hazardous materials that would make Earth uninhabitable. Now on top of that, anything in Earth orbit usually gets a bit of a drag from the upper atmosphere. The larger the object, the more drag it gets. So something that's as big as a Death Star would get enough drag that basically, even at very high orbit, it would essentially slow down and eventually fall back onto Earth, most likely destroying a big part of our planet as well, simply because this whole thing is like 160 kilometers in diameter. And if we were to put it in a very, very high orbit, it would require even more money that we just simply cannot afford. It would just be simply impossible. And don't forget all of the dangerous radiation that is located in this particular region of space where the Death Star will be constructed. And all of this radiation would most likely kill most of the construction workers that would be working on the Death Star, unless they were somehow protected by some kind of a shield, which we don't really know if it existed in the movie or not. Now the next thing, of course, is the Death Star Ray. The laser itself is just too science fiction right now. Even the most powerful laser right now would barely go through a chunk of metal, not to mention destroy an entire planet. So our technology of lasers is just not there yet. And the most powerful laser that we currently have is a 2 quadrillion watt beam constructed in Japan, and this particular beam is something like million billion times less powerful than what you would require to destroy a planet. In other words, we still have a lot to go. And on top of that, when you produce so much energy, this energy would most likely generate heat, which would most likely melt the actual Death Star. So how they dealt with that in the movie is a mystery. So taking all of these facts into consideration, you can kind of understand that building a Death Star is kind of impossible. Too much material, too dangerous to build, and would most likely fall back onto the planet if we put it in orbit around one. Hello YouTube and welcome to What the Math. As you can see, this is an X-Wing from Star Wars, and this is because Star Wars is coming out soon, and I figured I'm going to join in on the fun and build my own X-Wing replica. This one is an SSTO. I've noticed some people were having trouble getting their X-Wings into orbit, and as you can see, I have succeeded, and I'll show you what I did here, and I'm gonna go through this step by step just to give you an idea how to construct these relatively easily. Now, first things first, I've decided to use procedural tanks, even though you don't really have to. You can actually do this without the procedural tanks. And what I decided to do is the middle part is going to be just liquid and oxidizer fuel, basically mixed tanks. So you can kind of use these ones. This is what I used originally before I decided to use procedural tanks. And then I would suggest adding another one here, another half a tank, because it's a lot better to have more fuel than to have less fuel. The tip part you can actually just finish off with one of these things, one of these aerodynamic cones, or you can use something else to make it a little bit more beautiful. I've decided to use procedural tank here as well, just to make it cylindrical. Now, as for the pod, I decided to use the inline cockpit because it's probably the one that makes more sense. And lastly, right behind it, I put another tank just because I wanted to have as much fuel as possible. So this was sort of the central part, although I decided to make it procedural just to make it look a little bit more realistic. And so this is kind of what I had using procedural tanks. This is actually 3 separate tanks. And then if you look at the picture of the actual X-Wing, it has these markings everywhere. So I decided to use this opportunity to add some solar panels because unfortunately there's no other way for me to get energy later on, and you'll need it to return back to Kerbin. Now as for my tanks, for my engines, I decided to do this. So this is just an example of what I actually decided to do. Essentially, it is a liquid tank, half full liquid tank, because you don't really need that much liquid fuel, with an air intake, circular air intake in front, and a Rapier engine in the back. I'm going to explain to you why I chose Rapiers and not ramjets in this case. Then we have wing connectors here, and this is essentially just to make the wings look a little bit more realistic, and you need to put some ailerons because otherwise you won't be able to control your ship. Now, why did I choose Rapiers? Well, for one reason. And that reason is the maximum thrust at highest speed. So for ramjets, which I usually use for SSTOs, only at Mach 3 do you get maximum thrust. For these guys, it's actually Mach 3.7. So it's actually, in other words, these engines become most efficient at higher speeds, so you can actually abuse that and get to some ridiculously high speeds at lower atmosphere. And as long as nothing explodes because of the heat, you'll be able to actually get up to like 1500 meters per second before you have to engage Rapier engine secondary mode and start using the liquid fuel and oxidizer. Now they're not as powerful as ramjets, but they are a little bit more efficient for SSTOs, and I'm gonna demonstrate this when we actually get into the air. Now obviously I had 4 of these, and so this is what it kind of looked like from the back. So there's 4 Rapier engines. I decided to use Action Group 1 to manually enable mode, and so this is manual switching mode. And you have to be careful with this and kind of not wait too long, otherwise the ship will start spinning. Now, the worst part about the ship is the gear. Unfortunately, the rear gear is a little bit lower than the front gear, and I can only change that by actually moving this downwards, but I didn't want to do that because it's going to look very silly. So that's a problem. If you can solve that, let me know how. Otherwise, you'll see what happens. And lastly, so we have these markings here used up by the solar panels. And this is really it. This is all there is to it. It's a very simple design. I think it's pretty effective too. And so in terms of Delta V and in terms of TWR, it does have quite a lot TWR and enough Delta V to, I would say, even possibly escape Kerbin. So we'll see how it goes, depending on how fast we'll be going in the lower atmosphere. And here is my X-Wing on the launch pad on the runway. And so we're gonna launch this, just basically blast the engines full speed ahead. Unfortunately, I won't be able to take off until the last bits off runway because look at that angle of attack here. My elevation is really nose down basically. So let's not go too fast. We're just gonna try to make it to the end of the runway and then take off that way. Unfortunately, the back part here is not particularly appealing to the eye, and I'm sure someone out there will figure out how to make it more beautiful. And here we go, we're flying. Let's decrease our thrust. We're gonna go directly straight up, and I need to be watching TWR here because I want this to be in 1.3, 1.4 vicinity. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna get to altitude of about 7 kilometers, then face about 10 degree over horizon, and then after that we're gonna blast our engines full speed ahead. Now in terms of maneuverability, this ship could be more maneuverable. It's not really as maneuverable as the X-Wings from the actual Star Wars, but that's mostly because I didn't really put that many ailerons. You can definitely make this more maneuverable if you add more ailerons, or if you maybe change the wing position or something. I'm not particularly worried about that right now because it flies well and it does everything else I needed to do. I forgot to mention I also added 4 antennas right here just to make it look like an actual X-Wing. So right here there's actually I can release them. Here we go. It does look like an X-Wing a little bit more that way. Unfortunately, these of course will use up some of my electricity, but that's okay. So let's we're gonna make the angle of attack approximately 10 degrees, and now we're going to abuse the Rapier engine superpower at max speeds. So as you can see, I'm already going at ridiculously high speeds, way above the limit essentially. But that's okay. As long as nothing burns down, nothing explodes, I should be fine. Oh boy, I think my antennas might actually explode. I hope not. We'll find out soon enough. Alright, so we're going at 900 already. 1,000. And this is not even... Look at the TWR here. It's ridiculously high. Oh boy. That's not a good sign. A lot of my things are burning up already. If I'm lucky enough, they will not explode. But essentially, this is why repair engines are so much better at lower altitudes than ramjets or anything else, really. Because these guys are just power horses. Look at that. I'm going at 1,500, and it's still above 1 TWR. Okay, nothing exploded. I got lucky. I may even be able to get it to 1,600, maybe not. And as soon as we get, as soon as you see the surface speed falling, that's when you should enable your other engines. There we go. Alright. So I enable my secondary mode. And now all I need to do is get to the apoapsis of about 80 kilometers. Right now, stop. Okay, so now all we need to do is face toward prograde so that we don't actually lose any speed. And basically we'll be as aerodynamic as possible. And wait until the apoapsis. As soon as we stop burning and so on, I'm gonna try to create a maneuver node and then basically get into orbit. But as you can see, this is not a very difficult flight. It's not a very difficult SSTO to make, and it's actually kind of, I think I kind of like the looks of this. I mean, it's not as Star Warsy as it could be. The front here can definitely be a little bit better. Doesn't really look as realistic, I think. Oh, this is super hot, isn't it? But you know what? It looks like an X-Wing, and it flies like one, so there you go. So let's make a maneuver node here. Too much? We're gonna make this so that we actually get to a good enough orbit, and so we just need about 400 meters per second. We can start turning. This is why I brought those solar panels, because without them I would not be able to control my ship right now. And we have over 400 delta V according to this calculation thingy here, but I think I have more actually. I may actually have more. If you are struggling getting to that point, you may actually want to remove some monopropellant as well, because this will reduce your weight. Not by much, but by a little bit. So we still have liquid fuel. We still have a lot of liquid fuel actually. Way more than oxidizer, meaning that you can easily return back to Kerbin and fly around on all of that liquid fuel that you have left. It can actually, if you're really struggling, you may even reduce this. I think I had like 100. You may reduce this to like, I don't know, like a 50 or something. Alright, so in about a minute, we're gonna burn. I got really lucky this time that nothing exploded, because sometimes it does explode if you go way too fast in lower atmosphere, as you can imagine. But this is also why I added the antennas here, because I knew that they might explode, but at the same time they give this really X-wingy look that I was going for. Alright, so let's accelerate time a little bit, and we're gonna burn for right around now. And steady, steady, steady. High G's here, super high G's. Okay, that's good enough. Okay, why always spinning so much? So yes, there we go. Perfect orbit. Look at that. 84 periapsis, 93 apoapsis. Definitely in orbit. And all we need to do now is figure out if we want to keep traveling, exploring the universe, or if we want to return back to Kerbin. It says here I have 429 delta V left. Let me just see if this is correct, because I want to just transfer everything to my tanks. Alright, so everything is in this tank right here, and it looks like, yes, 429 delta V left. Possibly not enough to escape Kerbin, but I think enough to maybe get a slightly higher orbit than this. So you could probably get to like 200 kilometers orbit. But what we're going to do is we're going to decelerate and try to return to Kerbin. So I want to see how this works in terms of actual return. So I'm going to use my pancake maneuver, where I try to go horizontally or perpendicularly to my vector of velocity in order for me to slow down as much as I can. I'll show you what I mean in a second. Let's actually just add deceleration node right here, and we're going to decelerate and try to return back to Kerbin, and possibly, hopefully land. If it doesn't work, that's fine. If it works, awesome. Alright, my X-Wing is ready to return back home to Kerbin, and let's do it. Okay, that's enough. I think this will give me a periapsis of 54. Excellent. So now all I'm going to do is wait for this node right here. And once we get there, we're going to attempt to land. If it doesn't work, well, I tried. I have a feeling landing this will be really difficult, mostly because of the gear placement. So I may end up losing like a wing or 2 or possibly 3. So landing this will be interesting. Taking off is easy, but landing is hard. And also my nose is still red, so that's not good. That means that things are still really hot. So I'm going to initiate the pancake maneuver, as I call it. Basically, you go sort of perpendicular to your vector velocity, kind of like this. And what this does is essentially all of the air that's coming in is hitting your wings here and slows you down dramatically. So this is probably one of the better ways of re-entering as SSTO. If you try to go nose first or engines first, some designs may not actually be able to survive that. So I've learned the hard way that this is probably the better way of doing this. Do this until about 40 kilometers, and then if you still have fuel, you may actually want to use some fuel to slow down. If you don't have any fuel left, then fly nose first and, pray for the best. Now my periapsis and apoapsis are dropping dramatically right now, but the one problem is that I also, because I'm on the dark side of Kerbin right now, I'm not getting any more electrical charge, so that's a bit of a problem. So I do have to try to get to lower atmosphere as soon as possible, otherwise I'm going to be in a bit of a pickle. My orbital speed is decreasing, but not fast enough, unfortunately. And let's just see what happens. This is going to be really interesting. It's going to be a really interesting re-entry. Now, I think I'm going to use up some of my fuel. I'm actually going to turn this way and blast my engines. Full speed ahead. Use up all of the fuel. And now we're going to turn sideways again and hope that we can possibly decelerate a little bit faster this time, because we're going to be entering the atmosphere a little bit more dramatically with a slightly higher angle of attack. And obviously this is not how it's been done in the movies. You've never seen an X-Wing trying to re-enter in such a manner. But you know what? It's not a very good design. Honestly, when they were making those models for X-Wing, Y-Wing, and other wings, they're really hard to control, they're really hard to fly, and I'm not even sure how Luke Skywalker was able to traverse the galaxy and the universe in his somewhat interesting looking spaceship. So, alright, so here comes the first burn. I'm gonna turn other side, and then this side again. This will hopefully reduce our orbital speed. You can see it's already dropping dramatically. As long as I'm above 30 kilometers, I should be okay doing this, but I also have no more battery left. No more charge left, so I'm relying on my own sort of manual controls here. Alright, so it looks like we are re-entering the atmosphere. I should probably point myself toward... Oh, okay, I cannot control the ship anymore. That's great. That's awesome. Well, that's nice. Let's see what happens. Let's see if we actually re-enter safely or not. And because I have no more energy left, unfortunately, I will not be able to control the spaceship really easily. Okay. Whoa. Hey, we've survived. Look at that. Awesome. So, excellent. Now, let's see if we can actually land. I don't think we can, but... Is this... I don't even know if this is land or not. I'm gonna have to enable my engines in a second. Alright, it's flipping way too much. I don't know if I can actually control it, but I'm gonna try to run my engines a little bit just to see if I can possibly slow down and just point it toward the ground so I can get out of this stall right here. Oh boy. Oh boy. Oh, we're going toward the ground really fast right now. This is not good. This is not looking good. Okay. Get out of the stall, get out of the stall. Oh, stop stalling, stop stalling. Alright, looks like we regained control, but now I'm noticing that there's no actual land near us. So this is going to be a water landing, unfortunately. And it's not a very smooth landing either. It looks like I'm going to be landing sort of sideways-ish. Mostly because I totally have no energy left. This ship is really hard to control right now. And it just keeps going right for some reason. I don't know why it likes going right so much. Alright, I'm not sure why my ship keeps spinning in such a funny direction, funny way. But I'm gonna try to land this on the water as well as I can. I'm gonna release the gear. And why does it keep turning? I have no idea. There's something going on with the stall not really being resolved, even though I have my engines engaged and everything else. And, well, this is going to be a relatively nice and easy landing because we're just landing in the water. And look at that. It's kind of like a helicopter almost. And boom. Well, looks like this is a success. It's an underwater landing, right? Cool. Just like in Star Wars. Anyway, let's never speak about this again. Thank you guys for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this little SSTO from Star Wars video. And let me know what you think about the design. Let me know why you think it was spinning so much. And check out some of the Kerbal Space Program videos right here. Game you later, and bye-bye. Holy cow, most GE forces endured 11.2. Jebediah Kerman survived 11.2 Gs. That is crazy. Most astronauts can't even do 10. Jebediah Kerman, you're awesome. Thank you for watching, and bye-bye.